Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto leaves Konoha to start a family. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by CharitysSongbird and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1, Talking, Thinking Mental Conversation. Demon God are the like printed words. Jutsu, the broken truth. Konoha, the village hidden amongst the whispering woods, sitting upon the land of fire as its protector in the shadows. As one would first cast their eyes upon the city, they would find themselves drawn immediately to the massive mountain. They acted as the village's backdrop, adorned with the faces of heroes both living and dead. From its massive frame, the four faces of the Hokages cast their eyes down upon the village, each standing as both protector and inspiration to all those that lived beneath their gaze. Though the greatest of these four was undoubtedly the final face upon the mountain. Minato Namikazes, the fourth Hokage and defender of the village from the massive demon of legend, Kyuubi, the nine-tailed fox, that had set upon the village some 8 years previously. On that day so many years ago, the creature had appeared as though from nowhere to set upon the village with fire and death, its tails and roar scarring the land and its people alike. On that night the fourth Hokage had emerged to battle the beast, vanishing into the fire and death, taking the nightmare away from his village at the cost of his own life, and that is where the story would have ended. But, as the massive stone faces looked down on the village, they stood sentinel over what no one in the village could know, was that this was only the beginning, and at that very moment in a small home in the village, one that stood empty for several years, was soon to become the catalyst for this new story. The home itself was nothing too impressive, next to the stately mansions of the clans, but it was a warm home all the same, seated just a small distance from the center of town. If one were to look in through the window as the first rays of sun pushed their way through the paned windows, one would have seen the layers of dust that carpeted to interior lingering on the tops of chairs and tables alike. All except one spot where the dust was disturbed, a spot piled high with scrolls and packages alike, each becoming dustier as they neared the ground, piled up so that they formed some kind of perverse testament to the time that this place has been left alone. On top of this pile sat a final scroll not covered like its fellows, that seemed to have become unrivaled as it had come to rest upon the pile, causing it to now lay open. As the first rays of the sun moved through the dusty windows, it fell upon this scroll, highlighting the message written upon it. Jiraiya, Tsunade, we've made our choice on what we mentioned in our last letter. We can't just sit and wait it out anymore. We know it's dangerous, but it's not worth losing what we already have, and we're coming home. Don't tell Naruto, we want it to be a surprise for our little maelstrom. When we get to be a family again on his birthday, we'll be there in the morning. See you soon. Minato and Kushina Namikazes. Oh, and little Kana is looking forwards to seeing her godparents, and we expect you to spoil her rotten. Then just as the light finished tracing along the last part of the scroll, where a small trio of smiling faces looked up from it, the area above the scroll was suddenly lit by a golden glow, as a seal upon the wall beside where the pile stood began to shine. The next moment there was a blinding flash of light as three figures appeared, all with excited smiles upon their faces as they called out as one. Happy birthday Naruto and Nikki. Called the three as they looked around, the excitement on their faces turning to confusion at what their eyes were showing them. Slowly the three's eyes shifted from joy, even as the smallest of the group stepped forwards, only to trip over the pile, sending paper and dust sprawling, causing her father to move in time to catch the small reed before she fell into the dust-covered floor. As the blond man pulled the girl up, he froze as his eyes looked at what had caused his daughter to fall. From beside him his wife knelt slowly, her hands shaking as her ruby red hair lightly touched upon the dust as she reached out to pull a small dust-covered fox, apparently knitted by hand, still holding a small note tied to its leg. As she looked across at her husband, Minato could see the confusion turning to fear as she held the small dust-covered toy in her hands. Me Minato, what's going on? Where's Naruto? What is this? Managed a repeat as Minato turned his eyes up from her fact to look around the deserted dust-covered room, his own fear growing by the moment. I don't know Kushina, something is wrong. He managed as in his arms the little reed shifted to look up at her parents, obvious worry in her eyes. Dad, Mom, where's Nikki? Why is everything so dusty? Asked tiny reed looking up at her concerned parents. I don't know Kana, but it'll be okay, I promise I'll figure this out. Replied Minato in a calming voice as he cast his eyes around at the home, before gently moving himself and his family from the pile of and into the home, his eyes scanning back and forth around, even as his mind raced. What the hell is going on? Where are Jiraiya and Tsunade? Where's Naruto? Did something happen? Damn it, no, stay calm, panicking won't help anyone. I have to get to Sarutobi. I need to find out what's happening. I need to find Naruto. Concluded the blond man as he looked down at the stricken face of Kushina, who was still clutching the small knitted fox to her chest. Ideally, he noticed the tag hanging from its paw, his own heart skipping as he recognized it. How couldn't he after all? It was something he had helped make only a year before. Flashback. Kushina, are you sure about this? I mean, you're still better at the smaller seals than I am. Called Minato as he looked down at the small fox. Kushina in reply simply gave the man an annoyed look before bopping him on the head with a rolled up scroll, her figure sporting a few small bandages that he couldn't help notice. "Oh, can it, mister? I did the knitting, now you do the sealing," replied Kushina with a huff, causing Minato to smirk slightly at his wife's chiding. Hi Kushina-chan, besides wouldn't want your butter figures messing up the message," replied Minato with a smirk as Kushina blushed, shooting her husband an annoyed look as she pulled her bandaged figures to her chest. "Well, I just wanted to give him something from us that wasn't a scroll, what's wrong with that?" replied Kushina in a pout as she looked away from Minato's smiling face. Minato in turn rose to wrap her in a warm embrace, smiling down at her. "Nothing at all, Kushina-chan, I'm sure he'll love it, now get your clone ready," replied Minato as he went back to work on the seal that would send their well wishes along with their gifts to the boy. As he went back to work, Kana stepped up smiling at him. "Towson, when can I make a clone to see Aniki?" asked the little redeed, beaming up at them as Minato ruffled the little girl's hair, causing her to giggle and playfully swatted his hand. "Don't worry honey, you'll get there, I just wish the memories could make it back through the seal, but I'm sure it'll mean the world to your Aniki when you get it down," finished the blonde as the little girl smiled happily at him, her red hair dancing across her blue child's kimono. "Hi, I'll work hard so I can see Aniki soon," replied the excited girl as she moved away towards the small cottage they shared. Flashback end. But the sinking feeling, he turned to look back at the now scattered pile, his heart sinking as he saw each letter, each package, each item sent and forgotten. How could this have happened? He wondered as beside him, Kushina was struggling to keep from panicking as her eyes traced the pile, her own thoughts mirroring her husband's, even as Kana reached out to hold the small fox to herself, looking worriedly between her parents. Shaking himself from the brief memory, Minato steadied himself as he turned to Kushina. "I'm going to Sarutobi to find out what's," he began but was cut off as Kushina turned to him. "We're going looking for Naruto, Minato," started Kushina before Minato fixed her with a knowing look. "Oh, course we are Kushina, both of us are, you take Kana and my clones and start looking, I'll get to the Hokage, but I need you to send a clone with me in case either of us find him." Cut in Minato, causing Kushina to pause for a second before nodding as she and Minato caused a score of clone to appear. Kushina for her part was looking a bit more steady as she looked around at the assembled clones, little Kana moving to hold onto her white and green dress as she looked around at the now multiple sets of her parents. "Minato, what about the village?" started Kushina as Minato paused for a heartbeat, looking around at his clones as his mind showed him the reactions of people to see him running about. After a moment, Minato shook himself, turning back to face Kushina. "The village comes second to finding our son, Kushina," replied Minato as Kushina gave him a fierce smile. "Darn right it does, Databane, let's go," she replied as she and the clones turned towards the door, the crowd kicking up a wave of dust as all around her the blondes disappeared into flashes of yellow light. Leaving behind the dusty building that was meant to be a home, a shelter, and which had failed in both charges. Across the village, an elderly man sat before a desk covered in a mix of scrolls and charts, ideally tapping the pipe in his hand as he read down the lines of one scroll rolled out before him. Ideally, the man stretched, looking up and around the room, his eyes shifting over the photos of the previous cages, his eyes lingering for a moment upon his own much younger face. "If I'd known I was going to be stuck in this job a second time, I wouldn't be smiling so much back then," muttered Sarutobi as he tapped the ash from his pipe, turning his eyes back down to his desk as he shifted slightly in his bulky cage robes. As he did, his face shifted into a small frown as he looked down at his wrinkled old hands. "I suppose I wouldn't have smiled if I'd have known just how much I was going to fail, either. I just hope I can be forgiven someday," muttered the cage before a small pulse of chakra caused him to come to full attention, looming over as a masked Anbu appeared in a swirl of leaves before him. "Hokage-sama," spoke the masked figure as Sarutobi focused on the kneeling figure. "What is it, Hawk?" "Sir, there is a disturbance in the village, it seems illusions are running amok," started the Anbu, Sarutobi quirking an eyebrow at this. "Illusions causing a panic, but why? Everyone knows about them by now. What makes these so special?" asked a Hokage as he gently motioned for the Anbu to continue. "It's the illusions, sir, they are. It's of the fourth Hokage and a redeeded woman we haven't identified," continued the Anbu as Sarutobi froze, his pipe clattering to the floor as his eyes went wide. What?" he managed before a sudden flash illuminated the office, causing the Anbu along with another pair that had been concealed to jump before Sarutobi as all four of them froze at the sight of the pair that now stood before them. There in the center of the office was Minato, draped in the simple Jonin uniform he preferred, while beside him, Kushina stood, her red hair falling in cascades across her chest and back as her violet eyes, along with Minato's sapphire ones, blazed at the four before them. "Illusions again, the foxes are going too far this time, have they no respect for the dead?" muttered an Anbu as the pair looked around at the three before focusing on Sarutobi. "Sarutobi, what is going on? Where is my son?" called Minato, taking a step forwards, prompting the Anbu to close closer to their Hokage, looking between the pair before them and each other, as if not sure what to do or say. "Sarutobi," called Minato as he glared across the three Anbu, not even taking notice of them as he took another step forwards as beside him Kushina followed. Halt. Called one of the Anbu only to have Minato backhand the head Anbu so hard that the man was taken off of his feet and slammed into a nearby bookshelf, allowing several volumes to topple down upon the now unconscious Hawk. Stand down now and Sarutobi, answer me, damn it. Yelled Minato, letting out enough killing intent to shake the remaining pair of Anbu enough that despite themselves they took a few involuntary steps back. At the same time Sarutobi was frozen stiff looking at the pair before him. It couldn't be that they were gone, this was some sick trick. With an effort of will Sarutobi rose to his feet, his eyes locking upon Minato's as his own killing intent flared. Enough. Called the aged Hokage as Minato and Kushina turned to face him, matching his glare as he leaned forwards, his hands resting upon his desk. Your games have been harmless up till now, but this is taking it too far. I will not allow you to desecrate the dead. Using Minato or his wife's image with your actions is disgusting. Now get back to your forest or so help me, I will rip you apart with my own two hands. Replied Sarutobi, his eyes narrowed as across from him Minato and Kushina went from fury to confusion as they looked at the man. Forest. Death. Minato, what are you talking about? Asked Kushina as she looked from Minato to Sarutobi, her husband, looking just as lost as she did. Sarutobi, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but I don't have time for this. Where is Naruto? What happened to the plan? Called Minato as Sarutobi looked between the pair, some of the anger leaving him as she saw the naked confusion playing across their faces. What, you know where the boy is? Wait, did something happen to him? Is that why this is happening? Started Sarutobi as the pair now looked even more confused. Sarutobi, we just want our son back. The house was deserted, Jiraiya and Tsunade are nowhere to be found, and you're acting like we're dead, Databane. Called Kushina, becoming flustered enough at the situation to verbally slip, causing Sarutobi to freeze for a moment, his eyes going a little wide at her words. Who, Kushina, is that really you? Asked the man, her verbal tick and her movement slowly convincing him that the pair before him weren't just some fox illusion. Of course it is, old man, now what in the name of Raymond is going on, and where is my son? Called Kushina as beside her Minato rested his hand upon her shoulder to hold her in place as he swallowed his own anger, enough to focus back on the three before him. Monkey bear, both of you better take Hawk and leave now, unless you think that 8 years is enough time for any of you to lay a hand on me. So go before I put you back in basic again. I suggest you pull back. Finished the blonde as the two Anbu stiffened, their memory showing them flashes of their training back with the fourth when they had first become Anbu. Hi Hokage-sama. Managed Monkey, shaking himself slightly, having answered without thinking as beside him, his fellow stiffened a little as he looked back at Sarutobi for some kind of instruction on what to do next. Take Hawk and go. Called Sarutobi as the two Anbu rushed to obey, disappearing a moment later with the unconscious Hawk in tow, leaving the two Namikazes and the third along in silence. Broken finally as Sarutobi slowly sank back into his chair. How can you be here? You both died. The night of the Kyuubi attack, whispered Sarutobi, coming to grips with the possibility that the pair before him were actually who they appeared to be. The Kyuubi attack. Sarutobi, we were fine. The Kyuubi was sealed back, you remember, you were there. It was your idea for us to go into hiding, how can you have forgotten? Started Kushina, working herself into a panic before Minato reached out to hold her, slowly calming her as he looked across at the man, his own mind putting together what he was hearing into a horrible possibility. You don't know about the plan, do you, Sarutobi? What do you think happened to us? Asked Minato, his voice forcibly steady as he met the older man's eyes. Sarutobi for his part just looked at the man for a moment before speaking in a heavy tone, as if he felt a weight in recalling what he was saying. That night the Kyuubi ripped Konoha apart, my wife, all the escorts were killed, and Kushina kidnapped. Then you returned after driving off a masked man, and with the last of your strength sealed the Kyuubi into your son. We found you dead beside Kushina, and your daughter Kushina lasted just long enough to name your son before she died as well, so tell me how you can be here now. Finished the third, the pair before him looking stricken as they looked between each other. But that's not Minato. Managed Kushina as Minato focused on the third, his brow furrowing as he forced himself to remain calm. My wife and I, along with our daughter, are very much alive, Sarutobi, so obviously you are mistaken. Replied Minato as the third focused on the pair before. Kushina suddenly stiffened, her expression turning from worry to rage as she seemed to tense. The next moment Kushina was leaping forwards at Sarutobi, her hair flying out behind her as her face was twisted into a look of pure rage. You useless bastard. Screamed the redhead as she fought to reach the third, only failing as Minato sprang forwards to grab hold of his wife, looking just as startled as Sarutobi did as memories of the woman's rage flashed before his eyes, cementing even more that this was in fact Kushina. Kushina, calm down. Called Minato as Kushina turned her face up to Minato, still struggling to reach the target of her rage. No, Minato, let me go, you don't understand, they think Naruto's the fox, they think he's a demon. Raged a redhead as Minato stiffened, looking back at the third who suddenly looked sickened. Sarutobi, what have you done? Asked Minato as the third bowed his head in shame. I don't know if you are some kind of trick or ghost sent to haunt me, but I have lived with this failure long enough and there are things you need to know. Spoke Sarutobi as Minato managed to restrain Kushina enough for them to listen to the third's words. As the Hokage's office was becoming a source of much killing intent across the village, people were falling into a mixture of confusion and outright panic as clones of Minato and Kushina raced throughout the village over rooftops and alleyways, ignoring the stares or cries of surprise as they passed. A few minutes before Minato and Kushina started their discussion, a particular clone of Kushina had landed before a group of children and parents gathered in one of the small parks, drawing several confused looks as she raced towards them. "Hey, have any of you seen a little blonde boy about 8 years old?" called Kushina at the gathered parents as they looked over at the obviously flustered woman. "It will be okay, now where did you last see him?" asked one of the women stepping forwards with a gentle tone trying to assure two women before her. Kushina seized upon the brown-haired woman's willingness to help, turning to face her. "Thank you, I don't know where he might be, but maybe you know him, please." Started Kushina, her tone gathering a few more parents and children towards her. Okay, take it easy now, what's the little guy's name, maybe somebody's seen him?" asked the same woman given a reassuring little smile as Kushina returned it. "Thank you, his name's Naruto." Started Kushina, her words causing the group to suddenly tense, which did not go unnoticed by Kushina. Almost as quickly as they had moved to support the retreated mother, they now recoiled from her. Their worried faces shifting to looks of disgust or anger. "What is this, some kind of joke?" muttered one as she turned to let her children away, a few others scoffing and doing the same as Kushina watched, looking back at the brown-haired woman who was now looking at her with a measure of disgust in her eyes. "Wait, why are you?" Kushina began before the woman cut her off. "Enough, get out of here, we both know where that demon is, pretending you were looking for your son, that's just low." She muttered as she turned to leave, only to find her color suddenly seized in a vice-like grip as she was spun around to see the blazing face of Kushina now glaring at her. "Hey, what th?" she spluttered before she caught sight of the barely controlled rage dancing across Kushina's face, frightening her into silence. "What did you call him, who the hell do you think you are?" asked Kushina, leaking enough killing intent to scatter most of the group and causing a pair of nearby chunin to turn and begin rushing towards the pair to see the source of the commotion. "Well, let go of me. You're crazy," managed the women as Kushina hailed back a hand threatening to smash it into the woman's face. "Tell me where my son is now," called Kushina as the woman froze, her mind going suddenly blank as she looked upon the closest thing to death she had ever experienced. "It's in the forest, the Kyuubi's in the forest, please, the demons in the forest, don't hurt me," blabbered to woman as Kushina's eyes went wide, her mind putting the pieces together even as the first chunin reached her, slamming a fist into her arm where she held the woman suspended and causing the clone to vanish into a cloud of smoke. All across the village, every Kushina suddenly froze, a few actually falling in midair, enough to dispel as rage flooded them all. Kana, who was with the original, startled slightly as Kushina's rage blossomed. "Mom?" asked Kana as she tugged lightly at Kushina's dress, causing Kushina to look down at her worried daughter. "Mom, what's wrong, is it Aniki?" asked the retreat as Kushina fought her emotion back under control. "It's okay, Kana-chan, we just need to find Naruto-kun, okay?" smiled Kushina as the little girl nodded, following as Kushina turned towards the training fields along with the rest of her clones. Across the village, one of Kushina's clones reconnected with one of the Minato clones, bringing the pair to a halt outside of an older-looking compound. "Kushina, calm down, what's wrong?" asked the blonde clone as Kushina's clone shook with obvious rage. "Damn it, Minato, they are calling him a demon, they think he's the Kyuubi," called Kushina as Minato froze, not wanting to believe what he was hearing. "Kushina," he started before she cut him off. "No, Minato, I saw it in their eyes, they think he's a demon." "Why? He doesn't have the Kyuubi. What's happening?" managed Kushina as she unconsciously rested a hand on her own abdomen where half of the Kyuubi lay sealed. "Kushina, I don't know, but we have to find him first," replied Minato as Kushina steadied herself, nodding. "Hi, they said something about the forest, I'm heading there now," replied Kushina as the clone turned to race off as Minato's whipped out a kunai before dispelling himself to inform his fellows of the new information. Soon Minato's clones along with Kushina's were now racing towards the training grounds, skipping across the village and into the woods surrounding them. In one particular training field, a clone of Minato raced out, looking around and freezing as his eyes fell upon a familiar figure who likewise froze at the sight of him. "See, sensei?" called a silver-haired man, looking shocked at the man's arrival before his face turned to sadness. "Damn illusions, look, can't you foxes just leave me alone, I'm not in your forest and I'm not hurting anyone, so just leave," called the silver-haired man as she turned from Minato, who was slowly becoming accustomed to this reaction, thought the cause of it was still eluding him. With a few quick strides he reached out to turn Kakashi around to face him, his patience for this madness he found himself in drawing reaching its end. Kakashi, you received your Sharingan from Obito after a mission that went south and he was killed in the line of duty. You were my student and an arrogant ass most of the time to your team. Now I don't know what the hell is going on in this town, but so help me you are going to help me find my son Naruto, or I am going to take that kunai I gave you and brain you with it. Finished Minato, Kakashi's visible eye widening as he heard the blonde's words. Minato. He managed as the blonde nodded. Hi, now where is Naruto? Asked the man as Kakashi seemed to steady himself. He's in the forest, he's been there for years, sensei, how are you? Started the silver-haired man before Minato cut him off. Which forest? Called Minato, shaking Kakashi slightly as he asked. Behind the monument, but sensei. Began Kakashi before Minato pulled out a kunai, slamming it into himself and dispelling in a flash of smoke as the clone's memories scattered throughout the rest. At the same moment within the office, Minato and Kushina had finished learning just what had supposedly happened to them, even as Sarutobi had learned of what they insisted was his plan all along. Something is wrong, someone got to you, Jiraiya Tsunaide, where are they? Asked Minato as Sarutobi's head dropped slightly. They left the village after your deaths, replied Sarutobi as both parents stiffened. What, but they were supposed to look after Naruto, who looked after him? Managed Kushina as Sarutobi looked away from her, his voice becoming grave. He was raised in the orphanage until he was 4. Started Sarutobi before Kushina slammed a fist down onto the table hard enough to break straight through it with sheer strength. What? He lived with us till he was 4. What you're saying is impossible, he only came back to Konoha 4 years ago. Called Kushina as Minato looked at Sarutobi for a moment before stiffening and turning to Kushina. I know where he is, Kushina, he's in the forest overlooking the village, I'll meet you there. Called Minato as the Kushina before Sarutobi gave him a final glare before slamming her fist into her own arm and causing herself to disperse in a cloud of smoke. At the same moment Minato flipped out a tri-pronged kunai, its handle emblazoned with seals, and moved to follow, just as Sarutobi called out in a panicked voice. No, Minato, you can't, that forest is guarded. Called Sarutobi before Minato vanished into a flash of yellow, leaving Sarutobi to curse as he summoned a fresh Anbu to his side. Get every Anbu and Jonin you can and get to the Fox Forest now. Thundered Sarutobi as the Anbu bowed, vanishing a moment later as Sarutobi raced to a cupboard that held his shinobi equipment, silently cursing to himself as he did. Minato, Kushina, if that is you, I have to stop you. If you go there, damn it, if this happens, Kami only knows the cost, please let me be in time. Thought the man as he finished donning his blackened armor, turning to race out of his office, soon joined by a score of shinobi that raced beside him up the side of the mountain towards the Fox Forest, noting as they did blonde and red-headed figures disappearing over the lip of the cliff. As they raced forwards, several of them were looking fearfully over towards Sarutobi, wondering just what they were rushing towards. Hokage-san, what's happening? Called a bearded jonin who was racing up beside his armored father. Asuma, we have people headed into the Fox Forest, we need to stop them. Called Sarutobi as the bearded jonin tensed slightly before nodding as they raced forwards. Just when you think they would learn, do you think this could violate the treaty? The treaty is the least of my concern. Replied the old man as Asuma's face turned into a look of confusion. Why? Because those people are Minato and Kushina. Replied the elder man, causing Asuma to almost lose hold of the cliff face as he stared in shock at his father. What, how? He spluttered as Sarutobi shook his head. I don't know, but we need to stop them for their own sake. Finished the Hokage as they reached the lip of the cliff and began sprinting across the open ground towards a forest that seemed to teem with some unknown danger. As the group raced forwards, they spotted 3 figures standing a little ahead of a small force of blonde and red-headed clones. As they neared close enough, the clones turned as one to focus back on the approaching figures, who were drawn up at the Hokage's signal as he stepped out ahead of his forces. Minato, Kushina, you have to stop. Called Sarutobi as the 3 figures ahead of the sea of clones turned along with a little red-head that moved to stand behind her parents. At her movement, Sarutobi froze at spying the little girl that looked like a blind of both her parents. The sight of the girl caused Sarutobi to suddenly understand that these were them, the Namikazes were really alive, and he couldn't let that change. Sarutobi, we are getting our son back, if you want to stop us then you're going to have to be ready to fight for it. Called Kushina as her clones alongside Minato's turned towards the crowd of shinobi, all falling into stances that made it clear they were ready to make a fight of it. You don't understand. Called Sarutobi as the 3 turned to move closer to the forest. No, everyone hurry and restrain them. Called Sarutobi as he rushed forwards along with his fellows as the clones let out cries of their own, racing towards the oncoming shinobi. As the 2 forces meet, the sound of battle erupted along with cries of pain and blasts of smoke. Sarutobi himself rushed through the ranks in time to see the 3 Namikazes passing an invisible border as he let out a cry of fear that was suddenly drowned out by a bestial roar that shook everyone present, causing the remaining close to vanish in small blasts of smoke as Minato and Kushina halted, pulling Kana protectively behind them as they reached the very edge of the forest. Kushina, take Kana and move back now. Called Minato as she kept his eyes scanning back and forth. Kushina in turn moved to pick up Kana, who lost hold of the small object she had been cradling in the heat of the movement. Then just as she had pulled Kana up into her arms and was moving back, Minato moving with them as he continued to scan the surroundings, another roar shook the clearing as out of the forest burst a massive creature that turned bright red eyes upon the group before it. But the start, Minato, Kushina and Kana all froze, their eyes going wide as they focused upon what was a massive white fox, its snowy fur colored in small red markings that followed all down its form up and its single massive tail that lashed dangerously behind it. As the fox moved forward, so too did the trio move back till the full form of the fox now stood fully exposed in the clearing, looking down at them all. "What in Kami's name?" muttered Minato as behind him Kushina looked likewise shocked from the approaching beast. As if in reply, the massive fox let out a thunderous bellow as Sarutobi raced past the three, coming to a halt facing the massive fox and calling out as he did. "Cola, this is a mistake, please, they didn't know about the treaty," cried the man as the fox jerked its head down towards him and then over the three and back to the gathered shinobi. "Word, Sarutobi, you know our deal and the consequences of breaking it. Give me one reason that these three should be an exception to that," called the fox in a deep voice that carried just an hint to be recognized as female. As the fox spoke, Minato and Kushina froze for a moment. "It's a summons," whispered Minato as beside him Kushina looked on even as Kana managed to wiggle free of her mother to look at the massive fox. "Cola, something has happened, they are Naruto's family," called Sarutobi as the massive fox gave the man a surprised look before her focus shifted around to the two figures before them. Her nose flaring as the pair watched stunned was occurring. "So I see they carry his scent, no doubt, but the kid does not know of them and I will not allow him to be harmed, you know this, Sarutobi," continued the massive fox. Sarutobi bowed his head. "You two will be spared for now, the treaty will not be destroyed due to your actions, be grateful," spoke the massive fox, her words causing both Minato and Kushina to suddenly freeze. "To Kana?" cried Kushina, suddenly noticing that her daughter was not beside her. In turn, Minato also spun his eyes wide with panic until he saw her running behind the massive fox that turned seemingly equally puzzled at how the small child had managed to slip past it. "I didn't sense it, why wait, that chakra Kurama, so that's it. Wait, darn, that kitty never listens," thought the massive fox as it slammed its tail down before the other shinobi as Kushina and Minato moved to get to their daughter. Kana in the meantime had almost reached the very edge of the forest where her goal, the small knitted fox she had been holding, lay. As she moved forwards, her thoughts ignored the forest, only focusing on the small fox that she intended to give to her and Nikki when she found him again. As she kept moving, she didn't notice that something else was also moving towards her prize. "Hold, humans, she will not be harmed. But you are still not welcome here," spoke the summon as Kushina seemed ready to fight the fox if not for what she saw next. With a gasp, Kushina moved her hands up to cover her mouth as small trails of tears began to leak from those violet orbs. She wasn't the only one, as Minato soon went rigid along with Sarutobi, who turned his head away from the clearing ahead, cursing at what he was forced to see. Though the most intense reaction came from Kana, who skipped to a stop as from the tree line came a small figure wearing a simple shirt and pants, his feet bare as they stepped out of the shade into the clearing, his slitted sapphire eyes focused on the small knitted fox on the ground. As those present watched, a small boy, his blonde spiky hair falling back in a single long ponytail, reached out a clawed hand to gently pick up the small fox in both his hands, looking at it curiously before stiffening as he seemed to notice the eyes on him for the first time. Slowly the boy's slitted eyes traveled up to meet the pale violet eyes of Kana, who was looking forwards, her face blank with shock at the boy before her. For his part, the boy looked like a frightened animal about to run back into the forest any second, and as Kana raised a hand slowly towards the boy, causing him to shiver and take a step back, his eyes wide. "And no, it's okay, please," called Kana as she saw the boy ready to run. Her words caused the boy to stop looking from the fox to her and back again before holding it out to her gently, his head bowed. "I'm sorry, he whispered, holding the small fox out to Kana, who looked heartbroken at the boy's fear of her. Kana looked down at the small fox before looking back up at the boy, confusion written clearly across her face. He looked so scared, but why? Thought Kana as she stepped forwards, noticing as she did that the boy seemed to flinch as she neared him. In reply, Kana steeled herself as she reached out to lay her hands gently upon the small fox, pushing it gently towards the boy, who looked up into her eyes, confused by the apparent happiness in them as she gently shook her head. "No, it's yours, Naruto, happy birthday," smiled Kana as small trails of tears gently cascaded down her cheeks. For his part, the boy looked momentarily stalled as he looked from her to the fox before gently pulling it to him and giving her a small smile, showing a pair of more developed canines as he gave her a fox grin. "Ah, thanks, no one's ever gotten me something before. Who are you?" "Cola doesn't let anyone in the forest anymore, not after the last time," spoke Naruto as Kana continued to smile at the boy. "I'm Kana, I just came to Konoha," replied Kana as she noticed Naruto flinch slightly at the mention of the town before bowing his head slightly and taking a small step back. Oh then you'll hate me to everyone does I'm sorry. Started the boy before Kana moved forwards before he could move farther from her and wrapping him in a tight hug, her voice coming out slightly broken as she sobbed into his shoulder, causing the boy to go stiff as she held him. I don't hate you Naruto I promise after all that's what a sister is for. Managed Kana as Naruto looked at her in confusion even as she continued to hold him. Slowly Naruto reached around Kana holding her for a moment before suddenly shaking and pulling away his eyes wide again as he clutched the small fox to his chest, breathing heavily as his eyes darted around at her and then to the others watching as he slowly backed up muttering to himself. Aniki? Kana called worriedly as she reached out to him only in time to see him turn and rush into the forest. Before she could pursue a large white tail moved before her causing her to jerk her eyes up to see the massive fox looking down at her with a sad look in its massive red eyes. Peace kid, your brother has suffered much. It will take time before he is ready, but I thank you for your kindness. He has seen little outside of our kind. Go now little one your family is waiting. Finished the fox as Kana looked up before allowing herself to be led back to where Kushina and Minato stood along with Sarutobi, the massive fox padding along behind her, till it reached them Kushina moving forwards to grab onto Kana, holding her close as she looked up at the massive fox. It seems that you are indeed connected to the kid. I will send a messenger to speak to you, but for now the treaty stands and I cannot have you in the forest. I am sorry to separate you from your kid, but know he is safe with us. Sarutobi I will send the message as usual. Now take your forces and go. Finished the fox as it turned padding back into the forest and leaving the shinobi behind. As the white tail vanished into the forest, Minato knelt down to hold Kushina, who in turn was holding Kana, who was shaking in silent sobs, as Sarutobi dismissed the forces before looking around at the three members of the Namikaze family that had witnessed what had become of Naruto those 4 years previously. As he remembered this Minato looked up from his family to Sarutobi his eyes somehow dark as he focused on the Hokage. Sarutobi what the hell happened to my son? Asked Minato as beside him Kushina looked up matching her husband's gaze. A little under an hour later found Minato and Kushina seated on a couch in the Sarutobi compound Kana resting with her head upon her mother's lap as the pair looked across at the third, who sat leaned forwards, slightly holding his hand together, forming an arch that his tired eyes gazed over as he looked at the two. What happened to him Sarutobi? We have waited long enough. Spoke Minato as he reached over to take Kushina's hand tightly in his own. From across from them Sarutobi let out a heavy breath leaning back in his chair as he gazed at the pair with sad old eyes. It happened 4 years ago when you say he moved in with Jiraiya and Tsunade, and I recall him moving out of the orphanage for the first time the madam there having thrown him out. Started the third wondering just how this situation had come about. I didn't even know that he was out on the street until the firelight reached my office window I rushed out along with my Anbu, finding a crowd chasing him into the forest we just left. It didn't take long for us to catch up to them that what when they arrived foxes dozens of them the size of horses rushing out tearing the crowd to pieces it took every one of us to just get a few of them out of that bloody mess alive. And then she arrived Kola, you've met her. It seems that Naruto somehow summoned her and her kind by accident, never did figure out how he managed it, but after that the Fox clan set up shop in that forest. Continued Sarutobi pausing slightly as the pair across from him gave the man shocked looks. And you just let them take him? Growled Kushina as Sarutobi turned his gaze upon her. Yes I did, it seemed Kola was more connected than you would believe, she contacted the monkeys, the dogs, the toads, the slugs heck even the turtles, and arranged protection for their summoner Naruto, and marked their territory. If anyone enters there they are under her judgment, and if any Konoha shinobi tries to interfere with her rights, the summons break all of their existing contracts, so I had a choice fight the summons in a bloody battle that at best puts Naruto back in a village with people that formed a mob to kill him, and loss all the summons that Konoha has in the process, or leave him to them where he would be safe so he's lived there with them for 4 years. Finished Sarutobi as the pair of parents looked sickened. And what of Tsunade and Jiraiya? Questioned Minato as Sarutobi sighed. Jiraiya returned when he heard the news, but the toads made it clear they sided with the foxes he put himself into a self-imposed exile from Konoha for not being there to protect him after you died. Tsunade I don't know I haven't seen her in 8 years. Continued Sarutobi as he looked across at them. Except we didn't die and they were supposed to raise him, damn it Sarutobi why is it a summons we've never even heard of cared for my son better than you or anyone in this village? Stated Minato as beside him Kushina fought to remain calm. Minato I'm sorry started Sarutobi before Kushina shot him a look that silenced him. Sarutobi we may not know what is happening, but whatever else happened on thing is clear this village and its people have harmed my family. The only thing keeping me from letting the Kyuubi out to destroy what is left of this village is that someone else is involved in this. Spoke Kushina as Sarutobi turned to her. So then Naruto doesn't have the Kyuubi? Asked Sarutobi as the pair shook their heads. No Kushina and Mito hold half of the Kyuubi each Naruto simply absorbed a small amount of Kyuubi chakra during the sealing, at most he was a pseudo Jinchuriki. replied Minato as Kushina gently ran her hand through her resting daughter's hair. So when does this messenger, began Kushina before a sudden explosion of smoke appeared up the table before them, causing Kana to start away blinking slightly as she raised one hand gently to rub at her eyes. Soon the smoke cleared, allowing for the small form of a bright orange fox to appear blinking around at the figures before turning to Sarutobi. So these are them. Hey, you gave him the fox, didn't you? Spoke the newly arrived fox, looking across at Kana, who nodded gently, causing the fox that she noticed was wearing a small green scarf to give her a pleased look. Well, thanks for that, you should see him, he's showing it to everyone, haven't seen him so happy since Kola-sama let him start working with her. Grinned the fox as he turned to look at Kushina and Minato, in turn taking a moment to sniff them before looking over at Sarutobi. So his family. They seem right, but you informed Kola they had died. She wishes to know what is happening before she makes a decision. Continued the fox before he felt a small movement behind him, turning to see Kushina looking at him. Is he safe? She asked, her words carrying a sadness that the summon could hardly believe. With a small sigh, the fox seemed to relax before scratching itself ideally on one paw before looking at her through his vulpine eyes. So you're the mother. He looks a lot like you, and if you're anything like him, I hope you get a chance to be closer to him. As for what you ask, he's safe. Has been ever since we arrived. Smirked the fox, giving Sarutobi a vulpine grin that caused the old man to sigh and Minato and Kushina to look confused. A few villages attempted to finish what they started, a few shinobi went with them, and none of them were ever seen again. Finished Sarutobi as the fox let out a small purring chuckle. If it makes you feel better, the farmland hasn't had better fertilizer in years. Chuckled the fox before turning his attention back to Kushina. Rest assured, he is safe with us and as happy as we can make him. Though he is lacking in human contact, which is why Kola is willing to hear your side of the story. I hope for his sake she isn't mistaken. Finished the fox with a wave of his tail that caught Kana's attention, to the fox's apparent amusement, causing him to let the tail to gently brush up against her, causing her to smile despite herself. Hey, stop it, you, what's your name? Asked Kana, smiling as his tail brushed up against her, again causing the fox to grin. Took you long enough. The name is Yuri, little one. Replied the fox, playfully swatting the girl with his tail, causing her to give him a slightly annoyed look that he seemed to enjoy. What do we need to do to meet our son? Asked Minato as Yuri looked over at Minato and away from the smiling Kana. You tell me why you are only arriving now, and maybe why you too smell of the Kyuubi, or how your son managed to summon us to our new home from our long rest. Finished Yuri as the group set about their discussion. Meanwhile, as the family was explaining things to Yuri deep in the forest above the Hokage monument, an excited blonde was happily waving a knitted fox around, smiling as he raced along with a few trio of small fox kits that danced in and out of his feet as he leapt from tree to tree as the blonde raced up and between them with the grace of a seasoned shinobi, smirking the whole time. For the last time, he's my birthday present. Called the excited blonde as a chorus of yips came from below him, causing him to smile all the more. What? No, I'm not sharing. Called Naruto, turning as he leapt from another tree, only to crash into a large mass of white fur. Causing trouble with the little ones again. Came the mocking call of Kola as Naruto flashed her a happy grin. Hi Kola-sama, but look. Grinned Naruto as he showed her the knitted fox. I see, very nice Naruto, and where did you get that? Asked the fox as Naruto moved up until he sat on top of the massive fox, grinning at her. It was a girl, she said she was my sister. Kola, what's a sister? Asked Naruto, cocking his head to one side as the massive fox sighed. A sister is a part of your family, Naruto. Replied Kola as Naruto smiled a little. So she's like you and Yuri, that's great. Do you think she'll actually like me even after living in the village? Called the happy boy as Kola gave him a small smile. I'm sure she will, Naruto. For now, just don't wind up the kids too much. Replied the summons as Naruto gave her a happy smile before leaping from her back and onto the ground, sprinting ahead as the kids yipped excitedly behind him. Chapter 2. Talking, thinking, mental conversation. Demon God are the like printed words. Jutsu, defenses breached. Above the village of Konoha, deep within the forest that covered the mountainside, that held the vestiges of the Hokages, several figures pelted quickly from tree to tree, a light flutter of leaves falling as they danced forwards like shadows in firelight. However, unlike shadows, these particular figures lacked one important element to them. The ability to keep silent. Never. Called a smiling feral boy, his hair flying back as he swung a hand out, catching a tree and allowing his momentum to spin him completely around the wooden structure, his small claws cutting 5 trails into the age-old bark. As he came around the tree trunk again, he let his claw relax, causing him to fly forwards in between 4 fox kits that let out excited yips as they tried to turn to follow after the grinning boy, who slapped his feet to another tree, sticking to it only for a moment before blasting off towards another trunk, laughing as he outraced the kits. Flying forwards, Naruto sprang from one tree to the next, his fox-like grin spreading from one dark whiskered cheek to the next as he left the fox kits behind. With a small jerk Naruto shot forwards into the side of one of the forest's trees, his feet smacking against the bark, as for only a moment before he shot up and into the treetops, the chakra around him pouring out and in like nature itself fueled the boy's energy. Soon enough the boy found himself at the top of his chosen tree, his wide blue slitted eyes looking out over the treetops as a sea of green meet the pale blue of the sky. As a fresh breeze swayed through the forest bending the sea of trees, Naruto found himself at peace as he moved to stand upon a larger branch that gave him a perfect view of the forest around him. Slowly Naruto sank to sit against the trunk, his orange shirt and white pants, making him a visible speck of color in that wide expanse of green, even with the dirt and dust caked upon him. As Naruto found his seat he ideally pulled up a small knitted fox, its small black beaded eyes looking at him as he carefully held the toy delicately so to keep his claws from damaging the small knitted bonds. Slowly Naruto moved the fox toy closer, moving it over the branch before him like any child might in innocence, seeming to drift around his every action. After a few moments of this the boy paused, cocking his head to one side as his gaze noticed the small tag still hanging from the fox's paw. He had been so excited about showing off the knitted fox he hadn't really stopped long enough to inspect it in great depth. Pulling the toy fox up, Naruto brought one hand forwards, his clawed finger extended to poke lightly at the tag, curiosity apparent upon all of his features as he looked at the toy fox's eyes again. "Fox-kun, why do you have that on you?" asked Naruto in that way children sometime converse with an object they know full well cannot answer them. After a few moments Naruto sat the fox down in front of him, adopting a thinking pose as they looked at the little toy, its four-pawed arms propping it up in a sitting position, not unlike the boy himself, both legs out, his arms before him supporting him as he leaned forwards looking down at the tag, his bright yellow mop of hair leaning over him as he gazed at the tag. "Maybe Cola can't tell, no she'll be mad, because I never wanted to learn all that boring stuff about reading. Or maybe that Kana girl, she said she was my sister, maybe that's what sisters do," thought the boy for a few moments before a small flash of firelight and angry faces caused him to shiver. "If she doesn't hate me," whispered the boy with a small shiver looking down at the toy fox for a few more moments as he allowed his mind to let go of his worries, readopting the innocent smile he had. "Oh well Fox-kun, I don't mind because you're my first birthday present," smiled the boy as he reached forwards, his palm falling across the seal, the power flooding from his body as it always did. However, unlike usual the chakra that he bleed had somewhere to go. As the chakra pushed into the seal several things happened at once. First there was a blast of sound and smoke that covered the branch where Naruto had been sitting, causing him to yell with sudden fright as his eyes flew open in surprise. At the same moment from the smoke two smiling figures appeared, their arms outstretched, calling out in twin voices loud enough to send a few birds flying from the treetops around the area. The final action, however, was most likely the most relevant as both Naruto as well as the two figures found the branch not an ideal spot to either suddenly appear or to be suddenly frightened into jerking away. As a result the whole event did not continue upon the branch for very long. "Ah!" called Naruto as he pushed himself up, his feet slipping as he toppling back off the branch and towards the forest below, too far from the tree to reattach himself, even as two voices called out in excitement. "Happy birthday Nerd, ahhwa. Where?" called the pair as tall a blonde man with sapphire blue eyes and a woman with deep red hair and pale skin called out a birthday greeting only to find their feet now slipping off of a branch, finding themselves plummeting towards the ground. Before they could they heard a cry causing both to swivel around to see the blonde boy plummeting below them. The clones of Kushina and Minato without even a second's thought both pushed what little chakra their clone bodies contained into their limbs as they kicked off from the tree they were falling beside towards the blonde form below them. Neither knowing nor caring at the moment where they were or who they had appeared or only seeing the blonde boy before them and knowing they had to act. Naruto was crying out in fear as he felt his arms waving wildly, trying and failing to reach out toward something he could grasp, even as his vision continued to shift between the forest floor racing forwards or the skies racing away. Just as Naruto flipped around again his eyes fell upon a pair of figure hurtling towards him, their hair dancing in the wind as they fell bright red and yellow. As man and woman racing for him, fear etched across their faces, they reached out for him, the pair's arms spread wide, attempting to snatch the boy from the air. If possible the terror in the boy's eyes seemed to increase as the waving red and yellow blurs triggered a crippling fear in his heart, causing him to suddenly curl up, trying to cringe away from the pair even as he pelted down. His mind continuing to show him flashes of firelight, angry cries, and metal flashing steadily drawing closer to him, petrifying him even as in real life the clones close in on him. At the same moment in reality Kushina and Minato had reached the boy in midair, both stretching forwards to wrap themselves protectively around the boy, who seemed to shrink further as they closed in around him, letting out whimpers and small pleading noises that neither could make out amongst the rushing wind around them. Kushina held the boy against her, now curled around the boy, even as Minato reached around her, looking down at the forest floor rapidly approaching, before pulling out a tri-pronged kunai, flinging it forwards into a pool of water that fed a small stream that rushed past the base of the trees around. As the kunai flew into the surface of the pool, sending ripples out as the clone channeled all the chakra in his limited body, gripping the pair with him tightly as he did. The next moment there was a blinding flash of yellow light as the three disappeared, flashing into being a second later, only to slap into a nearby pool of water, Minato's clone blasting into a cloud of smoke as the chakra from his technique drained him, leaving Kushina's clone to splashing into the water alongside Naruto, both suddenly finding themselves in the center of a pool of water, spluttering as the water rushed over their heads and into their mouths. Despite this, Kushina pushed herself up, forcing the frozen blonde's head above water as she struggled to reach the shore. As the three impacted the water from the forest, several foxes rushed forwards, having heard the commotion, several gathering around the pool, letting out excited yipping as they spotted the red-deeded woman struggling forwards, holding the form of Naruto in her arms. The commotion soon drew more foxes as a few larger of the summons appeared, including the massive Kola, her white fur shimmering slightly as the light form the pool reflected off of it. As the greater summons arrived, a series of yips and whines rang out as those already present began to chatter excitedly about what had happened. A few of the younger kids yipping excitedly as they yelled about what they had seen, even as they danced around the feet of their parents. As Kushina's clone managed to pull herself and Naruto from the water, her feet sinking into the soft bottom of the lake, she looked up through the heavy folds of her down-drenched bangs to see the assembled foxes before her. At the same time, Kola stepped forwards, her own eyes focusing on the drenched Redeed standing in the pool of water before her, holding the still shivering boy as the din of noise from the summons quieted around her. As Kushina looked up, Kola saw the fear and concern in her face, even as she tightened her grip upon Naruto, sheltering him with her body, even as she looked up at the summon. "Stay back, I won't let you hurt him," called Kushina, still lost as to where she was, but knowing only that she was alone with her Sachi, surrounded by a sea of foxes whose eyes focused upon her drenched form. Kushina's words caused Kola to pause for a moment, looking from the woman to the tree above where Naruto had fallen from, before lowering her head once more to focus upon the Redeed before her. "Even as clones you protect the boy," finished the great fox, as Kushina's clone looked completely lost before. With a small flick of her tail, Kola struck the clone across the head, causing it to dispel, even as the massive appendage wrapped gently around Naruto, catching him and drawing him closer. As she did, the boy clung even tighter to her fur, still shivering as Kola looked sadly upon the small child. "It's alright, Naruto, I promise," whispered the massive fox as Naruto's breathing relaxed ever so slightly as the foxes turned to leave the area before Kola stopped, letting out a small annoyed growl. After a moment, a kid wandered out from behind a tree, dropping the small knitted fox, now absent of its tag, on the forest floor before racing off after its siblings under Kola's disapproving gaze. "I'm too old for this," muttered the fox as it reached down with its massive jaws, taking the small toy gently into its teeth before moving forwards into the forest, allowing the shadows between the trees to swallow her. While Naruto had been racing across the forest with the kids inside the sealed office of the Hokage, 5 figures sat across from one another as the light from the massive window illuminated the desk and seats that decorated to open room. At the desk sat Sarutobi, while upon the old wooden structure the fox Uri rested on one edge, his long tail waving gently behind him as he turned his orange-furred head around between the Hokage and the 3 figures seated before him, Kana having taken up a seat on her father's lap as beside him. Kushina continued to watch Uri, tapping her foot impatiently as she did. "Man, you're impatient, I finally see where the kid gets it," smirked the fox as Kushina paused for a moment, fixing the fox with an annoyed look, her hair rising slightly as across from her Minato let out a heavy sigh. "Kushina-chan, please stay calm, we need to tell them what happened, not beat them to a pulp," spoke Minato as Kana looked over at her mother, reaching over to grab hold of one of the locks of Kushina's hair, drawing her attention down as the fight left her at the side of her daughter. With a small chuckle, Kushina raised a hand, ideally scratching her head as she gave the pair a small smile. "Hi, sorry about that, Kana-chan, Dadabane," spoke Kushina, letting her verbal tick slip much to Kana's amusement as on the desk Uri let out a bark of laughter, falling over on his side, drawing everyone's eyes around as he squeaked out words between his laughter. "Oh he ha ha ha, oh Dadabane, ha 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 ha, just like Naruto, he ha Dadabe, oh ha ha ha," continued the fox as it rolled across the desk, scattering a few papers as Sarutobi sighed, looking around as the summon destroyed whatever progress he had made with his paperwork. "Uri, please stop destroying my day's work," muttered Sarutobi as the fox stopped rolling, now positioned on its back, looking at Sarutobi with a wide smile across its face. "Oh come on, hey, you have to admit that's just too funny, Kola thought we'd drop the kid or something when he started shouting that nonsense, not it turns out it's genetic," smirked the fox as behind him Minato cleared his thought, drawing everyone's eyes to him. "Uri-san, I believe you wanted to know what happened before we could see my son, not carry on a production," called Minato as the fox let out a huff, rolling back to its paws and turning to Minato with an annoyed look. "Well, excuse me for trying to lighten the mood," started Yuri as Kushina spoke in a voice heavy with emotion. "We don't want a lighter mood, Yuri, we want our son," spoke the woman as Yuri turned to her, all of the playfulness dropping from his form as he let out a breath, cracking his neck oddly as he moved to sit dead center of the desk, his eyes trailing slowly around the three Namikazes before he spoke. "Your son Uzumaki-san is under our protection, and whatever you may want, nothing." At this his eyes flashed suddenly scarlet, his fur becoming slightly sharper like a sea of needles as he continued, "Nothing will stop us from seeing he is not harmed even by you," finished the fox as it relaxed its fur, smirking slightly at the surprised looks on their faces before shaking itself slightly and looking at them once again. "So, you were saying?" finished the fox, shifting back to its more playful appearance, its fur turning back to silk as its eyes moved back to the deep gold they had previously, the dangerous growl now absent from its tone. "But we want to know what happened to Naruto. How did all of this happen?" asked Minato as Yuri gave a small nod, laying down on the desk, his head draped gently across his folded paws as it watched the three. "We were summoned, of course. How is still not clear, but Naruto summoned us to this land and we answered," replied the summon as Minato and Kushina looked at one another. "That's impossible, Naruto-kun couldn't have summoned you without a contract," spoke Minato as the fox nodded, grinning slightly. "And given there is no such contract, it is quite the mystery, isn't it? As I said, it is still not clear how we were summoned, but it does not matter now as the forest is our home and his sanctuary," replied the fox as Minato leaned back, rubbing his head as he tried to understand what was happening before him. At the same time, Kushina was thinking of Naruto, the brief glimpse of him she had spied, his bright blonde hair and his whiskered cheeks, different than she remembered but still her son's. Looking over at Minato, she allowed her eyes to travel down to Kana, who was looking down at her hands, apparently trying to find something she could offer, which sparked the woman's memory of what Kola had said to her. "Wait, that fox said something about Kyuubi, she seemed to know him, is that even possible?" wondered Kushina, looking up to Yuri, who turned to her as she called out to him, drawing Minato's attention along with CharitysSongbird towards the redeed. "Yuri, what is your clan's connection to the Kyuubi?" asked Kushina as Yuri gave her a confused little look before shrugging as it spoke. "What any clan's relationship with its founder is, I suppose, lots of legends and getting blamed for all the stupid stuff they do. I swear some stupid nine-tailed fox goes and gets himself a vixen, next thing you know, bang charka foxes," replied Yuri as both Kana and Kushina felt a small pulse of what they could swear was annoyance from their seals as Yuri seemed to grin, looking towards the two. "Oh, I'm so scared. Back off, Kyuubi, some of us may still look up to you, but I'm not among them. Your idea of fun isn't ours," spoke the summon as both Kana and Kushina again felt the pulse, Kana looking up to Yuri in confusion. "You can talk to the Kyuubi?" asked Kana as Yuri turned to her with a small shrug of his shoulders, ideally scratching at its ears. "Something like that, more like just feel him, but honestly who'd want a guy has an ego the size of the land of fire," replied the fox before turning to Kushina, who seemed to be coming to some kind of understanding. "Yuri, if you can sense Kyuubi, what about the rest of your clan?" asked the redeed as Yuri gave her a puzzled look before taking a thinking position for a few moments. "I would say we all can really, maybe not the kits, but even then they'd know he was around." "Why?" asked Yuri as Kushina swallowed as she looked up to the fox. "Does Naruto have any of the Kyuubi in him?" asked Kushina as Yuri looked positively lost at this point, blinking over at the woman as Minato turned to her with sudden understanding as Kana looked up between the pair before looking over at Yuri, who shook his head. "Naruto, nope, none," replied the fox as Kushina and Minato froze, Sarutobi noticing this action as they did. "Minato," began the man as the blonde man turned to his wife before looking down to Kana, his lips parting in a whisper. "It's gone," spoke the man as a truly broken look came over his face, even as beside him Kushina looked stricken but forced herself to speak through it nonetheless. "Yuri, Naruto was a pseudo-Jinchuriki, he was hit by some of Kyuubi's chakra during the attack, we had to seal it in him or risk it attacking his body," spoke Kushina as now Yuri looked confused, staring between the Kushina as Minato, who looked as though things had suddenly snapped into place for him. "The chakra?" whispered Minato as Kushina nodded, looking down at Kana, who looked confused between her parents, reaching up to tug lightly on Minato's shirt, drawing his eyes down. "Tausen, what's wrong, is Naruto nice and alright?" asked the girl as Minato took a breath, nodding as he hugged his daughter closer to him. "Hi Kana, he's alright," replied Minato before looking up to see Sarutobi looking confused beside Yuri, who mirrored the elder Kage as he watched them. "Minato, just what does this mean?" asked Sarutobi as Minato sighed, speaking slowly. "If my son doesn't have the chakra any longer, then it had to go somewhere if he was attacked as you say, frightened and scared," continued the man, twitching slightly as he spoke as thought he was holding himself physically back from flying into a rage. "Then what do you suppose a Jinchuriki would do then?" asked Minato as both Yuri and Sarutobi blinked a few times before realization blossomed across their faces. "Wait, are you saying?" started Yuri as Kushina spoke. Naruto accidentally let out all of the Kyuubi chakra he had every drop when he was chasing into that forest calling for help, and that chakra, the chakra of you founder, summoned you there. Finished Kushina as Yuri paused for a moment before nodding. So that's why we ended up here. Cole will want to know, but I still have to know where you were. Asked Yuri as Minato looked up, his mouth opening to answer before he suddenly flinched, his eyes widening as he shot straight up Kana in his arms as the clone's memories flooded through him. Minato. Started Kushina as the blonde looked to Yuri, now breathing heavily. Yuri Naruto, he started the blonde before Kushina likewise shivered, suddenly standing bolt upright and looking towards the fox as well, her own clone only just vanishing. Kola. Yuri, please, is Naruto alright? Called Kushina as Kana looked worriedly between her parents, even as the fox looked completely lost. What? What are you? Started the fox as a small puff of smoke beside him drew everyone's eyes to see another fox appear, obviously female with deep maroon fur, a white ribbon tied like bow around her tail. The newest arrival turned to gaze at Minato and Kushina, speaking in a sharp tone. You too, Kola wishes you to know that Naruto was unharmed and to thank you for your actions. Spoke the fox, nodding to them before looking around to Yuri with a disapproving look. Honestly, Yuri, are you still here? One would think you could manage to hear a story without taking all day like usual. Spoke the female fox as Yuri smirked, flicking his tail over his green scarf, not meeting the other fox's eyes as he groaned. Not everyone's a busybody, Lou, I was getting to it when you showed up, and those two, here he jerked his tail towards Minato and Kushina, went all weird on me. Replied Yuri as his tail went back to lazily moving behind him, Lou looking slightly annoyed, but turning to face the family once again. Cole requests your presence at the forest edge tomorrow morning at dawn, but only the three of you. Before turning to Yuri with a disapproving look. Let me guess, I'm supposed to head back now instead of waiting, right? Muttered Yuri as his fellow fox nodded, vanishing a second later in a small puff of smoke, leaving Yuri to stand up, stretching slightly as he looked across at the family for a moment, sighing as he did. Well, I'll get the story later then, for now it looks like you get what you want, I'll see you tomorrow. And look presentable, okay, we don't get guests often. Spoke the fox before with a flash it was gone, leaving only the completely destroyed pile of papers and ink that had been the Hokage's desk behind, as all three adults looked at one another in complete confusion for a few moments. Minato. Started Sarutobi as the blonde looked over at Kushina, moving over to her before casting Sarutobi a harsh look. I'm taking my family home, Sarutobi. I think that's enough for now. Spoke Minato, vanishing a moment later with his wife and child, leaving the aged cage to look at the spot they had departed from, breathing heavily as he turned his chair around to look out over the village as the last vestiges of the sun began to dip below the horizon. What is happening? Muttered the man as he summoned a few Anbu to his side. Hokage-sama? Asked two porcelain masked figures appearing in a small flicker of movement, falling to knee as they addressed the man before them. Go and inform the other Anbu and Jonin that today's matter is to remain sealed till I say otherwise. Spoke Sarutobi as the pair nodded, pausing for a moment as one of the pair spoke. Hokage-sama, what about the council and clan heads? Asked the Anbu as Sarutobi sighed. Everyone, Hawk, until we understand what is happening we do not need interference. Spoke Sarutobi as the two Anbu nodded before vanishing in another flicker of moment, rushing to complete their work even as Sarutobi turned to look down at his destroyed work. I swear he does that on purpose. Grumbled the cage, looking down to one sheet of carefully organized files that now had hundreds of tiny holes punched in it from Yuri's spiked fur. A moment after the three Namikazes had departed, a flash of bright yellow light illuminated the dusty living room they had entered that morning, their arrival sending a few dust trails up as they settled onto the floor. As they landed, Minato summoned a group of clone, while gently leading Kushina and Kana into the yard behind the grass, having grown up over the fence, as a sea of wildflowers now ranged across the area surrounding a few trees. As the three stepped out onto the small porch area, Minato let Kana slip to the ground, where she looked around surprised at the area, moving forwards to look over at what at one time must have been a flower bed. As the little retreat approached the area, Minato and Kushina were moving over to sit gingerly upon an old wooden bench, kept free from dust only by the continued wind and rain of Konoha. As they reached it, both slowly sank down, both looking out across the yard as they looked out at their daughter. After a few moments, Kushina spoke, turning her eyes flecked with tears up to Minato. Minato-kun, he was so scared when I held him, he was scared of me. Whispered Kushina as Minato felt a bone-deep ache at the pain in Kushina's voice, gently moving her closer to him as he brushed one hand gently through her hair. It will be okay, Kushina-chan, he's safe and well, see him soon. Replied Minato, holding the woman even as his eyes went distant, watching Kana pluck a rather large red and white lily from the garden. Flashback, the much younger Kana was bent over pulling a red and white lily free from a small garden, grunting slightly as she dug her heels into the soft grass, grinning in determination as her red hair fell across the small white dress she wore. Hurry, Imoto-Kasen's going to come back soon. called a yellow-haired boy dressed in a bright orange shirt, looking around an open area that looked as though it belonged in the mountains of some distant land, several snow-capped points visible from the small plot of land where the home the two stood outside of resided. "Well, help me then," called Kana, looking over at her fellow 4-year-old, who nodded, moving over to try and help her pull the flower free, neither seeing the blonde-haired man who had only just returned smiling as he watched a small production form the shade of one of the large pines that grew around the home. As Minato watched the pair finally manage to pluck the flower, Kana falling back into Naruto, causing the pair to topple to the ground with a small thud that drew a noise from inside the home. Both children froze at this, looking around before jumping up in an absolute panic. "Nice, and what are we going to do?" called Kana, clutching the flower as Naruto looked over at her before spying a nearby picnic table, pull his emoto forwards. As the pair reached the small wooden table, Naruto darted under it, pulling Kana with him, just as the rear door to the home opened, showing a younger Kushina stepping out, looking around before her eyes fell on her garden. "Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, Kana Uzumaki Namikaze, you two get out here now," called Kushina as she stepped out of the house, allowing the door to stand open as her red hair rose into 9 tails of hair that waved wildly as she looked around the yard for any trace of her children. Huddled under the table, Kana and Naruto exchanged worried looks as the red-headed girl looked out as her mother moved around the yard searching for the pair. "Nice, and she's going to find us," whispered Kana as Naruto gave her a worried look, his eyes darting around as he spied the door still partially open to the home. "Kana, when I say go, get to the house," whispered Naruto as he edged back from his sister, rolling out from the table, peeking over the brim slightly as he saw Kushina looking around one side of the house. From his vantage spot, Minato watched, chuckling softly as he saw Kushina moving towards one side of the house, even as his son poked his head out from one side of the table he had hidden under. As Minato watched, Naruto moved past the table over to a small set of gardening tools, pausing for a moment before he seemed to steel himself for what came next. But the small shove, the metal instruments came tumbling down one on top of another, causing a cascade of noise that prompted Kushina to whirl around, spotting Naruto standing there looking guilty. But the small leap, Naruto took off running, his mother spinning to follow after him. As the blonde passed the picnic table, Kushina in hot pursuit, he called out in a slightly elated voice, causing Minato to openly chuckle at his son's plan. "Kana, run," called Naruto even as a length of golden chain shot out from Kushina, wrapping Naruto up and yanking him back into her arms. However, as Kushina spun, Kana was already away, the door to the home shutting with a snap as Minato finally stepped forward, smiling as he moved over to see his 4-year-old son unraveled from his wife's chains, smiling broadly up at Kushina as he did. "Hi, Kasen," smiled the boy as Kushina gave her son a disapproving look, even though a small smile was twitching at the corners of her mouth. "Hello, Naruto-kun, mind telling me where your emoto is?" asked the woman as Minato arrived, looking down as Naruto, who gave as innocent a face as he could manage, which only made him look, if possible, more guilty. "What, no, I haven't seen Emoto all day, Databeo," replied Naruto, looking away as Minato vanished in a small flash of light before appearing with Kana now in his arms, still holding the flower and looking guiltily up at her father. "Sorry, Naisen. Tausen caught me," whispered Kana as Naruto looked back to Kushina, chuckling slightly. Happy birthday, Kasen," called Naruto, hugging Kushina as Kana held out the flower to the red-headed woman. For a moment Kushina looked between the two before breaking into a grin, rubbing her son's bright blonde hair and laughing as she looked around at Kana, who was smiling as Kushina gently took to the flower from her outstretched hand. "Okay, you two, come on now, dinner's almost ready. And thank you both, it's lovely," called Kushina as the two children nodded, Naruto giving her a small hug before hopping down to follow after Kana into the home as Minato moved to stand beside his wife, smiling after the retreating pair. "Well, aren't you just a softie?" smiled Minato as Kushina gently spun the flower in her hand, looking over at Minato with a proud smile. "Nope, just have amazing kids. And I know you were watching them, so guess who gets to fix the garden," smiled Kushina as the pair moved inside after the rest of their family, Minato chuckling as he held his wife. Flashback end. Sighing, Minato looked down to Kushina, holding her gently as Kana returned, hoisting herself up beside her parents, a small flower clutch in her hands as Minato smiled at his daughter. It had always been that way, always till that day when it had all gone wrong. And now the thing that caused it is gone and responsible for saving Naruto-kun. It's like fate is laughing at us, thought Minato as he held his family close, looking up as a few of his clones passed out into the yard, beginning their word there as well. It hadn't been the homecoming he had expected, but one thing was clear to Minato: whatever was before them, they would never let their family be broken ever again. All the Namikaze family was coming to grips with what awaited them the following day across the village. A particular silver-haired shinobi was sitting in a bar staring off into space as the bartender dropped another bottle before him, as well as the two jonin beside him. Slowly Kakashi reached for the bottle, taking a single large swig before passing it to the black-haired man on his left with courtesy of a bump from the small bottle. Without words his fellow took the bottle from Kakashi's grasp, following his example by hefting a swig from the bottle himself before following the train down, allowing the final member, another black-haired man, to take the bottle in turn. This is crazy," muttered Asuma, turning his eyes right to Kakashi as beside him, Guy took a huge swig of the sake, laying aside his usual rants on youth as his longtime rival nodded weakly, signaling the bartender for another round. "Hi, but it's happened," whispered Kakashi as another bottle was set before them. As Kakashi began the chain of drinking again, Asuma sighed, scratching at his beard lightly as he patted his coat for a cigarette, looking around the bar, ideally thankful that it was practically empty apart from his own group, only a single Chunin lying face down one of the small wooden tables that scattered the area, the hustle and bustle of the street drifting in through the awning, but otherwise allowing the place to remain in near silence. "What I mean, I don't even know what to think. I feel like I should be celebrating," but Asuma started as beside him Kakashi took another swig before setting the bottle down. "But Naruto, now that they're back, what happens?" whispered Kakashi before allowing a small smile to grace his lips. "If Kushina's back we may not have to worry about that," chuckled Asuma as he took the bottle from Kakashi, getting a small nod from his fellow. "You're right about that," muttered Kakashi as Guy took the bottle, downing it in one swig before pushing himself up, turning to face Kakashi, his face carrying a red blush courtesy of his recent drinking as his eyes dropped slightly. "My eternal rival," he called in a slur of his usual excitement as he raised a hand to point towards the empty seat beside Kakashi, his eyes slightly unfocused. I think you've had enough," started Asuma as Guy shook his head, staggering for a moment before stopping himself. "No, my flames have not been diminished," muttered Guy before managing to find Kakashi, pointing at him again. "My eternal rival, you have not gone to your sensei, we must grade him with our youth," managed Guy, raising his hands in triumph before his eyes rolled up and he fell backwards, crashing into a table and bringing the whole setting down with him with a resounding crash. Looking over, both Asuma and Kakashi saw the man still smiling faintly, his arms twitching as they turned to one another, chuckling softly. "Well, looks like I need to get him out of here," chuckled Asuma as he stood throwing a few notes onto the table before bending down to sling Guy over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. As he situated the spandex man into place, the bearded man gave Kakashi a backwards glance, his mouth curving up in a small smile. "Well, you heard him, get going, Scarecrow," called Asuma as he moved out of the bar, Kakashi looking after him for a few moments before turning back to take another swig from his bottle before he too departed into the gathering dusk. As day became night, the Namikazes found themselves back inside their home, a few shadow clones finishing moving through the seal in the living room, even as Kushina walked down the stairs, having just put Kana to bed, looking around to see Minato sitting in the living room looking past a small table towards a fireplace, his eyes unfocused as Kushina slipped down beside him, causing him to blink around at her. "Oh hey," whispered Minato as Kushina offered a small smile, reaching over to pull her husband close. "Just a few more hours, Minato, just a few more," whispered Kushina as the blonde took her hand, smiling faintly at her. "Aye, just a bit longer," whispered the man as he looked down at his wife, sighing as he turned his gaze to the seal decorating one wall of the room. As his eyes fell upon the complex set of seals, he felt his heart tightened at what they had caused. Tracing his gaze, Kushina let out a small breath, moving to lay one hand gently across Minato's cheek, turning his sapphire eyes around to meet her own violet ones. "Minato, it wasn't your fault, we didn't have a choice, none of us did. We couldn't have known this would happen," whispered Kushina as Minato bowed his head, allowing Kushina to lean her head to gently rest against his. "Hi, and he's safe," whispered Kushina, thinking to the boy she had seen at the edge of the woods and the warmth she had felt when she had seen Kana embrace him again. "Whatever this is, we'll get through it together," continued Kushina as Minato let a small smile touch his lips, brushing a hand gently through Kushina's hair as he did. "Hi, go get some rest," started Minato when a heavy knocking came at the door, causing both to turn their gaze, narrowing at the sound. After a small pause, another series of knocks came as Minato stood, moving Kushina slightly behind him so that his body acted as a shield to her own. Gingerly, the blonde moved over to the door, on hand already under the white coat he favored as his dress, his figures tracing the hilt of a kunai, ready to act if need be. "Who is it?" called Minato in a steady tone as the knocking fell silent. "See, sensei," came a small voice from the other side of the door, disbelieving as both Kushina and Minato gave each other small looks before the Kage stepped forwards, reaching out to open the door, showing a man with gravity-defying silver hair, one eye covered by a headband, staring at the man now standing before him, his one visible eye wide in disbelief. "Sensei, it is you, you're really alive," whispered Kakashi as his eye traveled across to Kushina, his breath hitching as he saw her standing behind Minato, looking almost no different than what she had when he had last seen them. "Kakashi, you too," whispered Kushina, seeing the shock on his face as Minato sighed, stepping back to allow the shinobi into the home. As Kakashi moved in, he soon found himself sitting across from the pair, simply staring at them in silence. "I don't understand," managed Kakashi finally as Minato nodded, leaning forwards to clasp his hand before him as he looked at his students sadly. It seems that no one does. We come back to find everyone believing us dead and our son having been driven from our village, only surviving thanks to a summons race," replied Minato as Kakashi bowed his head sadly. "I'm sorry sensei, if only I had adopted him," started Kakashi as Minato shook his head, interrupting the man. "Kakashi, I'm not sure you didn't," replied Minato as Kakashi turned to him in confusion as Minato continued. "Something has happened here, whoever or whatever it was managed to get to Jiraiya, Tsunade and Sarutobi. For all we know it got to you as well," finished Minato as Kakashi looked across to Kushina, who nodded sadly. "Kakashi-kun, the night of the Kyuubi attack you were one of only 4 people who knew what happened, and from what you have already said it's clear you don't remember. From what Sarutobi said you believe I died along with Kana and Minato, leaving Naruto to hold the fox," spoke Kushina slowly as Kakashi nodded. "Which isn't what happened," spoke Minato, drawing Kakashi's eyes around to meet his sensei's as the blonde continued. "After the Kyuubi was caught, Kushina and I managed to seal it into Kushina and Kana by splitting it, allowing us to use a weaker seal than the original one," started Minato as Kakashi turned to him, shocked at what he was hearing. "Naruto received a small portion as well that escaped during the break, but only enough so that it required a seal, not enough to recreate itself or harm him. After that we barely had enough strength to keep the barrier up," continued Minato, turning to Kushina, who nodded, picking up the story. "After the barrier faltered, Sarutobi, Tsunade, Jiraiya and you made it inside before we could stabilize it," spoke Kushina, seeing the confusion in Kakashi's eyes and continuing on. "We still didn't know if that masked man who had started all of this was gone and the barrier was potentially the only thing keeping him from reaching us. When your group arrived, Tsunade managed to stabilize me while we moved to a safe house, secretly avoiding any more contact, eventually ending up here," finished Kushina, gently raising a hand to indicate the home around them. "But then why do I remember seeing you die?" asked Kakashi, raising a hand to his covered eye unconsciously. "My Sharingan Genjutsus don't work on me, nothing can tamper with my mind to make me think you two were dead when you weren't," continued Kakashi as both Minato and Kushina nodded. "Hi, it shouldn't be possible that such a thing worked on you, but something did happen. That night after the attack, with both Kushina and I just a hair's breadth from death, we knew if the masked man came back we would never be able to protect ourselves or our children. Sarutobi suggested that we go into hiding, keep safe out of sight until Naruto and Kana were older and the village was strong enough to protect us. Tsunade suggested a place we could be safe and we went into hiding," spoke Minato, pointing over to the seal on the wall that stood out against the tan walls, the inky blackness of it stretching out to form an overlapping seal, looking more like the work of an artist rather than a tool of ninjutsu. "That seal was developed by the joint effort of the Uzumaki and Senju, it's why Tsunade was able to give it to us at all. It's like Minato's Hiraishin, only older. It was made by the second Hokage with help from Mito Uzumaki Senju and works to transport things like the Hiraishin. It lacks the speed and abilities of the Minatos, but has a longer range to it," finished Kushina as Kakashi looked puzzled. "It can't be used in combat, but for hiding it is perfect, at least we thought. Once we arrived though we found ourselves in the hidden home of Mito Senju. The seal also allows a lock from both sides. If one of the seals is locked, nothing can be sent through. And the compound we hid in was so heavily sealed not even summons could enter into it, that seal was the only way in or out," finished Minato as Kakashi nodded, looking over at the seal as a clone of Minato appeared in a small red flash before moving a few more things into the home. "Wait, if that's right, how did you get through it?" asked Kakashi as both of the pair shook their heads. "When we arrived it was unlocked, whoever did this somehow managed to open the side, but without ours open it was useless to them. Our side was only ever open for a second when we would send messages back. We organized that before leaving, anyone trying to get through would have destroyed themselves," finished Minato as Kakashi nodded, leaning back in his seat as he gazed up at the ceiling. "So Naruto was sent back as well, and whoever did this struck sometime after that," whispered Kakashi as Minato nodded, his eyes closing as he gripped his hands together, staring down at his feet. "Hi, they must have been after us, but since we were impossible to reach they went after our son," whispered Minato as Kushina let a few tears fall from her eyes as Kakashi nodded, looking up at the two before nodding. "Whatever the situation, you are my sensei, Minato. I won't let anyone get to you or your family again, I promise," spoke Kakashi as he stood moving to the door as Minato turned to watch him. "Kakashi?" asked Minato as the silver-haired man turned to him with a small eye smile. "Just going to take the watch, Minato-sensei, after all I did always go first," spoke the man as he stepped out, letting the door close softly behind him. Out in the moonlight, Kakashi felt the small moisture in both his eyes as he looked up at the moon. "I won't let anyone get to you, sensei," whispered the man as he vanished in a flicker of movement. As the night stretched on, the moonlight would every once in a while glint off of the porcelain face of a dog as dozens of him seemed to guard the home that night, watching from the shadows till dawn came to relieve him. As dawn broke across Konoha, the first rays moved steadily across the tops of the trees, pushing back the shadows as the world came alive, stretching itself skywards towards the warmth of a new day. At the same time as most of Konoha was just rising and the night guard returned to their homes, the day found three figures standing before the massive forest looking towards it, their eyes and ears peeled for any movement or sound. Minato and Kushina had decided to forego their shinobi gear, choosing instead to dress in the clothing they favored in their home lives. Kushina now wore a simple pale blue shirt under a tan dress that reached to her ankles, while beside her, Minato wore a navy turtleneck emblazed with an Uzumaki spiral on either shoulder, a pair of simply shinobi pants below. Between them stood Kana, her red hair pulled back into a ponytail, as she patted distractedly at the small yellow shirt she wore, her black shorts reaching just below her knees as she continued to fidget, waiting for the arrival of Kola. As time stretched on, Kana was not alone in her impatience, as beside her Kushina was also become agitated, looking around the open field before turning back to the forest, tapping her foot irritably. "Where is she?" muttered Kushina, looking back at the forest as Minato took a hand gently steadying Kushina as he gave her a small smile. "Stay calm, Kushina-chan, we need to remember that they are the reason Naruto was kept safe. If they are a little late, we have to accept that," spoke Minato as Kushina seemed to deflate under his words, nodding as she reached down to stop Kana fiddling with her shirt again. "Okay Minato, you're right," replied Kushina. Before Minato could respond, a small pattering of feet drew their attention around as Uri stepped out of the forest, looking around at the three before smirking slightly, moving over to sit before them. "Well, look who's here," smiled the fox, lightly brushing Kana with his tail, causing the girl to smile as she felt the silky softness of the fur upon her hand. Before she could snatch the appendage, Uri withdrew it with a smirk, looking up to Kushina and Minato before turning back to the forest with a small jerk of his head. "Well, follow me then, they're waiting for you," spoke the fox as he settled off at a trot into the woods, the Namikaze family following after, passing into the woods as they did, feeling the slightest tingle as they did so, both Kana and Kushina feeling an odd calm fall over them as if some part of them found this place comforting. As the Namikazes entered into the forest following Uri, a distance inside, Cole lay her immense head turned, looking down at Naruto, who shifted nervously, looking around as if trying to find an escape from the fox's gaze. "Are you sure, Kola? I don't even know what family is like," whispered Naruto as the great fox let out what felt like the 100th sigh, gently swatting its tail back and forth as she fixed her eyes upon the blonde before her. "Hi, I am sure, Naruto-kun. The three coming here are indeed of your blood, and so they are your pack, more than even we are. That is what a family is, kid," replied the fox as Naruto looked around nervously. But what if they don't like me? What if they hate me like everyone else?" shivered the boy as Kola raised one paw up to gently poke at the boy, causing him to look up into her eyes as she spoke again. "They do not hate you, Naruto. Yesterday mere shadows of who they are were willing to throw their lives away to protect you, and the kid Kana held no hate for you when you spoke to her, did she?" asked Kola as Naruto shook his head, looking down. "No, but you'll be here, right?" asked Naruto as Kola nodded. "Hi, but I won't hide you from this, Naruto. I will always protect you, but this forest is not a prison for you. They are family, Naruto, your family, and you owe them the chance to know you," finished Kola as her ears fluttered slightly, her head turning toward the forests as Naruto moved back to put Kola between him and whatever it was, the massive fox, taking note of this but holding her action till the guests arrived. She didn't have to wait long as Uri soon came through the forest, followed by the three Namikazes who stopped at the sight of Kola laying before them, her eyes trailing back across them as they stepped into the clearing, several of the other foxes arriving to watch, peeking out from the branches above, as well as trees surrounding the small clearing, all watching curiously at the new arrivals. Ideally, a few of the younger kits moved up, sniffing curiously at the group before letting out excited yips when Kana looked at them, sending them scurrying back to their families as the elder foxes let out small chuffs of amusement at their antics. "Kola, they have arrived," called Uri in his lazy tone as Kola nodded towards the fox, who moved off to plop down beside a few of his fellows, opening his mouth wide in a yawn as he watched the Namikazes face Kola. For a time the only sounds in the clearing were the small yips of kits or the noise of the wind rustling the branches as the two groups faced one another, till finally Minato stepped forwards, looking to Kola as he spoke. "Kola-san, we have come as you requested. We would like to see our Sachi," spoke Minato in a powerful tone that nonetheless held the respect that made it clear this was not a demand. Kola watched the man for a moment before replying, her ears twitching as she felt the small pressure of Naruto from behind her. "Very well, however no, it is the boy's choice what to make of you," spoke Kola calmly as Minato nodded. As she finished speaking, Kola lifted her eminence's tail gently into the air, curling it back to rest against Naruto, slowly pushing him from his place of hiding. From the Namikaze's view, their first sight of Naruto was barely a glimpse as the boy rounded the fox's back, shivering slightly as he moved to hid behind the tail, which flicked him slightly as he stepped back from it into clear view of the family. At the same time Kola spoke in a clear tone, her voice causing Naruto to turn to her, still shaking slightly. "Naruto, I told you not to hide from this," spoke Kola in a scolding tone as Naruto turned his slitted eyes up to meet her own, holding her gaze for a moment before his head dropped, his bangs falling across his face as he gave a weak nod and turned to face the Namikazes, shivering slightly as he held the knitted fox close to his chest. Seeing this, Kushina and Minato felt their hearts break as their son took a few shifting steps forward, still not looking at them, as he held himself as though trying not to be seen by them even as he moved slowly closer. After a few steps, Naruto stopped a couple yards short of the family, shifting nervously as he shook his head a few times as if trying to clear his own doubts. It's okay Naruto, Cole is here, she said. They won't hate you, it's okay, please let it be okay please, I don't want them to hate me please, thought the blonde boy as he shook himself, finally stopping as he drew in a deep breath. Just when Kushina and Minato thought that Naruto was sure to run from them in terror, the little boy finally lifted his whiskered cheeks up, his eyes full of fear, but also a small twinge of determination as he looked across at the three, his mouth opening slightly as a whisper of a voice drifted out. "Hello, I'm Naruto." He managed his voice so withdrawn and terrified it felt like a physical blow to both parents, as beside them Kana looked sadly across at her brother. After he spoke, Naruto shook again, his head dropping from their gaze, looking away, but standing still as Kana took a hesitant step forwards, noticing as she did that Naruto seemed to strain against himself to not retreat from her, causing her to stop only a foot from the boy, looking at him sadly as she spoke. "Hi Nyasin," whispered the girl as Naruto slowly looked up to her, his blue eyes meeting hers as he squeezed the fox she had given him tighter as a small smile crossed his face. "Is Kana-chan," replied Naruto as he watched Kana give him a soft smile, noticing as she did that he still looked afraid of her as he looked around nervously. "Nyasin, don't you remember me?" asked Kana in a sad tone as Naruto looked back to see small tears in her eyes that for some reason caused a bone-deep ache for him. "Remember, but I only met Kana yesterday, why is she sad, did I do something wrong, will she hate me now?" thought the blonde, shaking slightly as he took a half step back, bowing his head again. I'm sorry," whispered Naruto as Kana left a few tears fall from her eyes as she steadied herself to take a step forwards, reaching out to put one hand gently upon her brother's, feeling him shiver below her touch even as he rose his eyes to her face again, that soft smile still there. "It's okay Nyasin, you don't have to be scared," spoke the red-deeded girl as Naruto looked up at her, nodding slightly as she gently took his hand in her, leading him ahead until he stood before Minato and Kushina, shifting slightly so that he stood behind Kana, only sparing small glances to the pair above him. Slowly both Minato and Kushina knelt to the ground, looking towards their son, even as Kana helped to move him beside her, the small boy gripping her hand tighter as with his other, he squeezed the fox to his chest, keeping his eyes down as Kushina gently spoke, her eyes glistening with fresh tears as she reached out gently to her son. "Hello Naruto-kun, I'm Kushina, your cousin." Her words causing Naruto to look up to her where she could still see the fear playing across his eyes even as her hand gently settled upon his whiskered cheek. A soft smile played across her lips as she felt her son's face, the familiar texture of his whiskers, now more pronounced but familiar to her touch, as her voice came out slightly choked. I've missed you so much," whispered Kushina as Naruto blinked at her, feeling a strange warmth from her hand as it stroked his cheek. For a moment Naruto's mind flashed him images of the firelight and howls again, but somehow they were muted by that warmth he felt from the pair's contact. Something comforting that allowed him to not draw away as Kushina moved slowly to wrap her arms around him, his body tensing only for a moment before he let himself lean into the embrace for a time. As her arms closed in around Naruto, Kushina felt the momentary shiver from her son before he slowly sank into her arms. As his body gently lay against her own, Kushina felt the tears falling heavy upon her cheeks as she held her son close to her, as streams of soft apologies issuing from her mouths as Naruto allowed himself to relax within her arms. "I'm sorry Sachi, I'm sorry, I love you Sachi, I'll never leave again, I'm sorry," whimpered Kushina as Naruto moved slightly to look up into her violet eyes still wet with tears as the boy gave her a small frown. But why? Why don't you hate me?" asked Naruto, blinking slowly as Kushina forced herself to keep from crying as she shook her head, looking down at her. "Sachi. No Sachi, I could never hate you, you're my little maelstrom and I won't let anyone hurt you ever again, I promise," whispered Kushina as beside her Minato took a knee, reaching a hand out slowly to push softly through Naruto's hair, give the boy a sad smile as Naruto turned to his head to face the man. "We're your family Naruto, that means we'll always love you, no matter what else there is we will always be there for you," whispered Minato as Naruto looked at the man for a few more moments before nodding slightly as he felt Kana move closer to him, still holding his hand in her own. After a few moments Minato looked up from his son to where Cole lay, seeing the small content look upon her brow as his blue eyes met her gold ones. After a few moments Kushina and Kana along with Minato finally stepped back from Naruto, who had stopped shivering but still looked a little uncertainly around as if not sure what to do now. As he was about to speak, Cola's voice called out from behind him, causing him to turn to face her as the Namikazes around him did the same. "Seems they do not hate you, kid," spoke Kana as Naruto gave the Namikazes a small look before turning back to Kana, shaking his head slightly. "No," murmured Naruto as Cole let a small smile grace her fox face. "Naruto, I need you to be strong for me, can you do that?" asked Kola as Naruto looked at her for a moment before nodding as the fox slowly pushed herself up, moving forwards to stand before the group. Her eyes looking around them slowly. "These people are going to take you home, I need you not to be afraid. They offer you a home I could not provide," started Kola as Naruto looked suddenly worried, stepping forwards as his eyes went wide with concern. You're sending me away?" asked Naruto in a heartbroken tone as Kola gave a small sigh, bowing her head to just before Naruto so that she was looking right at him, his small form reflected in her massive eye. "No, Naruto, this forest will always be open to you, but it cannot be the home you need. You will never be without us, Naruto, I promised you that a long time ago. If you ever need us you have only to call," spoke the massive fox before rising slowly to tower over the group, fixing her eyes forwards as she did. From below, Naruto turned his gaze around to the foxes who all turned to Kola before looking back to the boy, giving him soft nods or smiles, showing they supported their leader's choice. After a moment, Naruto turned back to see the Namikazes standing just a few feet away from him, watching him as he turned round to fully face them. After a few moments, Naruto slowly moved forwards, reaching over to take Kana's hand again, his other hand pulling up the knitted fox clothes as she looked up at them. "Naruto, would you like to come home with us?" asked Minato softly to the boy, who looked up to the man before looking around once more, his eyes tracing over Kana and Kushina once before he nodded slightly. "Ha, but not through the village," he whispered, a touch of fear evident in his plea that caused Minato to bit back a growl as his mind flashed back to the village at large. Steadying himself, Minato nodded, moving forwards, reaching out with one hand to rest again upon the golden locks of his son. "Of course, you don't have to worry, I have a way to avoid that," smiled Minato as Naruto blinked up at him. In turn, Minato turned his eyes around to Kushina, who with a soft smile allowed a small golden chain to exit her back, slowly moving to the ground, digging into the soft earth as Naruto watched, his eyes wide with interest as she worked. "Oh, how do you do that?" whispered Naruto as Kushina finished the seal, smiling fondly at Naruto as the chain retreated into her back. "It's my chakra, Sachi. I can make them to help me," spoke Kushina as Naruto blinked at her before nodding with a small smile. "Oh," replied Naruto as he felt a small tug at his pant leg and looked down to see a few of the kids blinking up at him. With a smile, Naruto bent down to scratch the small foxes gently as beside him, Kana looked down with stars in her eyes as the little foxes leapt onto her brother, licking his face affectionately as a few baby yips came out. From behind her, Kushina and Minato both felt their hearts swell as Naruto smiled happily under the kids' assault, let out a few light laughs that reminded them of those times years ago they had shared with their son. From his position, Naruto turned, still smiling faintly, to see the warm looks on the Namikaze's face, feeling somehow safer at the sight before he spotted the obvious wonder in Kana's eyes, smiling himself as he reached up to take her hand. Looking around, Kana saw her hand in Naruto's as her feral brother gestured her down beside him. Slowly, Kana sank down onto the grass, looking over at the fox's kids, who blinked at her for a few seconds before one moved forward, sniffing slightly at her before letting out a happy purr and rubbing up against her hand, causing her to giggle from the touch, causing the other kids to yip as they too moved over to meet the girl, drawing forth fresh giggles from her as she scooped up a pair of kits who licked happily at her face even as she continued to laugh. "Okay kids, come on, it's not like you can't visit," called a familiar voice as Naruto and Kana turned along with the kids to see Uri standing beside them before the little foxes gave the pair of children a last yip before moving over to Uri, who chuckled as they blinked up at him. "Nice try, go on now," spoke the fox as the kids gave him annoyed whines before dashing off into the forest with the other foxes as Uri moved over towards Kola, giving the Namikazes a backwards glance as he reached her. "Look after the little Databeo kid, okay?" called the fox as Minato and Kushina nodded, Kana and Naruto moving up to stand beside them, the boy now a bit more relaxed, though still looking nervously around from time to time. "Ready, Nyson?" spoke Kana, smiling as she caught her brother's hand again, feeling the small squeeze as the boy moved a bit closer to her, nodding. "Hi," replied Naruto as above him Minato flew through a few hand signs and with a flash of yellow light, the four figures vanished from the clearing, leaving just a few leaves to rustle by as the foxes slowly departed till only Uri and Kola remained. After a few seconds, Uri gave a sigh, moving forwards, drawing Kola's eyes to him as he gave her a small smile. "I'll go and look after him, so stop worrying already," smirked Uri as Kola gave a small huff but nodded, watching as with a small poof of smoke Uri vanished as well. As the wind whistled through the forest, Kola found herself looking up at the sky, small flashes of a tiny blonde child running around years previously moving before her mind, bringing a smile to her face as she whispered softly into the silence. "You better remember to visit Kit," Her words drifting across the clearing as she slowly padded back into the forest, her massive tail swaying slowly as the shadows swallowed her form. Naruto had left the forest. Chapter 3. Talking, thinking mental conversation, demon god or the like, jutsu, home away from home. The noonday sun was now hanging above Konoha banishing what few shadows remained around the village, even as figures moved around still oblivious to the return of their hero, a few still chatting about the fox's newest prank, calling for some kind of action, while others wondered just what the summons could have wanted by having the illusion running around the village. Meanwhile within a small compound sitting a small distance from the bustle of the center of town, a small flash of yellow light briefly illuminated the windows as a group of 4 people appeared inside the home, the newest addition to the arrivals blinking around in awe as his slitted eyes traveled up to the blonde man above him. Where are we? Asked Naruto, his voice shaking as he visibly shivered looking around the unfamiliar home as he seemed to be trying to simply shrink away from everything in the room at once. Seeing the boy's concern, Kushina instantly bent down, reaching over to gently cup her son's whiskered cheek, turning his eyes to hers, speaking in a gentle soothing voice. "It's okay Naruto-kun, this is your home, no one's here but us, you're safe," whispered the redhead, continuing to gently stroke her son's cheek as he looked into her eyes blue into violet. As their gaze met, Kushina could see the fear etched across the boy's face as he looked around the unfamiliar place, shivering as he did so. Kushina in turn looked around as well, trying to think of what she could do for the boy before spotting the back down, her eyes turning to it before moving back to Naruto as she slowly reached out, wrapping her arms softly around him. As her arms closed around him, Naruto's tiny form gratefully sank into her embrace, trying to bury himself in it, hiding from his new surroundings. As the feral boy curled into Kushina's arms, the woman rose, slowly moving back towards the yard, Minato moving ahead of her, having seen her destination and opening the door as she moved out into the yard, Kana following after but being held back by Minato as he watched his wife move out into the noonday sun. As Kushina stepped into the freshly cut grass, she sank to her knees after reaching a small distance from the home, ignoring everything but the boy shaking slightly in her grip. "Naruto-kun, it's okay, look, you're okay. Please Achi, it's okay, I promise," whispered Kushina, small fleck of tears building in her eyes as she watched her son shivering in fear like a frightened animal. As her words slowly fell over Naruto, the boy's face shifted slightly from the woman's neck where he had buried it, looking around as his eyes and breathing slowly returned to normal. "I am okay," whispered Naruto, more to himself than anyone else, before looking up to see Kushina smiling softly at him, nodding her head as she fought back tears from her eyes. Seeing this, Naruto blinked up in confusion, reaching a hand up, careful to keep his claws pointed towards himself as he rubbed at the redhead's cheek, slightly removing a single tear, frowning slightly at her. "Well, what's wrong? I didn't do anything, did I? I'm sorry. Please," started Naruto before Kushina gently shook her head, smiling down at the blonde boy in her arms. "No Naruto-kun, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm alright. Are you okay?" whispered Kushina as Naruto looked around the yard, blinking in apparent interest before looking back towards the woman, nodding slightly with a small smile on his lips. "Hi, I'm okay," murmured Naruto as he found Kushina gently lowering him to the grass, his toes feeling the familiar touch of the earth as he looked around the yard, spotting Kana standing just a few feet away watching him. Slowly Naruto moved away from Kushina, walking slowly around the yard, blinking around at it before looking back at the family, his head cocked to one side in apparent confusion as he looked from them then to the yard and back a few times, looking as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage to actually do so. "Naruto-kun, is there something you wanted to ask us? It's okay, you don't have to be afraid," called Minato as he moved over to stand beside his wife, both looking worriedly over at the blonde boy who blinked at them for a few moments before nodding slightly. Why does this place feel like you?" asked Naruto, causing Minato and Kushina to look at one another in confusion before turning back to Naruto, speaking softly. "What do you mean Naruto-kun, what does it feel like?" asked Minato as Naruto looked at the pair before stretching out his arms and waving them as if gesturing to the air around him like it was a physical presence they could see, the knitted fox still clutched in one hand, waving limp in his grasp. "Like when you used that chakra stuff," finished Naruto, his voice dropping along with his expression as he looked between the pair, concern moving onto his face as he saw they didn't understand his words. Seeing this, Naruto felt a small bit of fear as he looked at the two, wondering if they were going to hate him now, if they were going to throw him out into the village now for asking about something that they didn't seem to understand, if they'd call him a freak like the villagers had. Before Naruto could fall into panic at the thoughts pushing through his mind, Kana moved over to him here, violent eyes focusing her brother in a look of concentration. As she moved over beside the blonde, she offered a small smile, nodding to him as she looked over to her parents before gazing back to her brother. "Nikki, you mean this place feels like our chakra? Can you feel chakra?" asked Kana as she tilted her head to one side, the mop of red hair falling beside her as she looked expectantly up at the blonde who blinked at her for a moment. "Yo, you mean you can't?" asked Naruto softly, looking slightly ashamed as if he had done something wrong by feeling the energy around him, as Kana allowed a smile to cross her face as she reached to take her brother's hand, shaking her head. "No, but that's awesome, Aniki, how does it feel? Hey, what's mine like?" asked Kana excitedly as Naruto blinked at her before smiling a bit himself as he looked at her for a moment before speaking. It's like there's two, one's warm and happy, but the other's really annoyed and angry. Is that the Kyuubi?" asked Naruto as Kana gave a small giggle, rubbing ideally at her stomach. "Hi, that's Fuzz, but that's so cool, so you can feel chakra everywhere?" asked Kana excitedly as Naruto nodded, slowly relaxing as he spoke with irritated. Across from the pair, Kushina and Minato were watching as Kushina looked up to Minato. "Could he be a censor?" asked Kushina as Minato shook his head slowly, watching Hisashi waving his arms trying to explain what he was feeling to his sister. "No, a censor can't feel chakra if it isn't in a person, he's doing more than that. I think sensei mentioned this one, something about natural chakra," replied Minato as a small chuckled drew the parents' attention around to see the orange fox with a familiar green scarf around its neck. "Hey, not bad, I'm actually shocked you'd heard of it before. I take it that sensei of yours was some kind of sage, right?" called Yuri, watching the parents turn to him. "Yuri-san, what are you doing here?" asked Minato as the fox gave a small sigh, stretching out across a low bench that sat just past one of the flowers, his eyes lidded as he looked at the pair. "Oh, don't worry, I'm just here to watch. Cola talks a big game, but she's a big softie, would have spent all day worrying after the kid if someone wasn't here to watch after him. Besides, figured you might need some help filling in the blanks." Finished the fox as both parents looked to one another before nodding back towards the fox. "Thank you, Yuri-san," whispered Kushina as the fox raised a paw, waving her words away. "Relax with the san, alright, just Yuri is fine, besides this is a lot better than just sitting around in the forest all day," replied the fox before he turned his attention back to where Naruto was sitting as Kana pointed more things out for him to explain, smirking at the pair. "Anyway, you're the kid's a natural at using natural energy, or what you call chakra. Guess it comes with flushing his system of everything else when he summoned us, but the point is he's basically always tapped into the stuff now, makes hiding anything or lying to him pretty much impossible. Heck, I'm guessing the reason he hasn't run screaming from you is he can feel you don't mean him any harm," spoke Yuri as Minato and Kushina watched him open-mouthed. "Does that mean he knows how to use his chakra?" asked Minato as Yuri seemed to consider this for a moment before shrugging. "I guess, in the way you know how to use your hand and I know how to swing my tail, for him it's just second nature, like breathing. Heck, if you tried to explain it to him he probably wouldn't understand a word you said, but show him something and he'll soak it up like a sponge," finished the fox as the parent nodded, looking around to see Naruto and Kana turning to them, the blonde smiling as he spotted Yuri waving happily at the fox as the pair made their way over. After a few hours in the yard, with the help of Yuri, the family was able to bring Naruto inside, though he insisted on clinging to at least one of the family members at any time, as if he were afraid to be alone in the home itself. When asked why, he only said that it felt like something bad had been there, causing Kushina and Minato to exchange worried looks as they sent clones around to reinforce every seal on the home, adding another layer of protection on top of what was already present, just to make sure, as Naruto sat on the couch with Kana watching in amazement as clones moved by handling the tasks assigned to them. As days slowly shifted into night and the family began to prepare for bed, Naruto found himself nervously standing beside Minato, his hand holding firmly to his father pant leg as he looked into what the blonde man said was his room. Looking in, Naruto could see a small bed accompanied by a few shelves and toys, which all felt somewhat familiar to him. Even still, it was not enough to make him wish to be left there alone as he pulled the small knitted fox he had been given closer to him. Looking up from the room, Naruto turned his blue eyes up to meet Minato's own, his mouth opening just enough to show the points of his overdeveloped canines. "Do I stay there?" whispered Naruto as Minato smiled softly down at the boy, shaking his head. "No, Naruto-kun, you don't have to. How about you stay with Kasen and me tonight?" offered Minato as the blonde boy nodding, slowly letting go of the man's pant leg to reach up as Minato took his clawed hand. As the older blonde's figure closes around those of his son, Minato gently led Naruto down the hall and into his room, Kushina looking around at the pair, smiling softly as they appeared. "I see Kana wasn't the only one who didn't want to sleep alone," smiled Kushina, looked over to the bed where Kana already sat smiling over at her father and brother as they entered. "No, I think everyone wanted to be together tonight," agreed Minato, slowly leading Naruto over and helping up onto the bed where the blonde moved to sit beside Kana as Kushina and Minato moved around, turning off the lights, slowly plunging the room into darkness. As the final lights shut off, Naruto momentarily stiffened, the darkness of the home somehow more complete than what he remembered from the woods. For one heartbreaking moment the blonde boy felt the urge to run to get out of that place before a warm feeling moved over him as Kushina slowly slipped into bed beside him, her arms moving firmly over him and Kana holding them gently as he moved her body protectively around her son. Even as Naruto felt Kushina close around him, her warm chakra washing over his body, another equally warm feeling came from the other side as Minato moved into bed reaching over as well, his arms joining his wives as they wrapped their children in a protective embrace. "It's okay Naruto-kun, we'll be here with you," whispered Kushina, her words causing the boy to relax as he sunk slowly into the soft bed. "We promise," murmured the boy, unable to keep the fear out of his voice as Kushina moved closer to him, enveloping in her warm embrace as a feeling of protection that came with it washed over him. "I promise Naruto-kun," replied Kushina as on his other side Kana let out a small yawn, moving a hand across her brother as she let out a small breath. "Night Nikki," whispered the girl, her voice already heavy with sleep as Naruto found his own eyes becoming heavy. As he tried to respond he found his mouth not willing to move as his eyes shut and sleep gently overtook him. Soon the entire Namikaze family was asleep, Minato and Kushina wrapped protectively around their children as each sank into the deepest sleep they had shared in years. As the first rays of sunlight began to push through the windows of the Namikaze compound, the light fell upon the sleeping form of Naruto, sandwiched between the redeeded forms of both his sister and mother. As the light moved slowly over the blonde's face his eyes scrunched together before he leaned forwards, burying his face into his mother as behind him, Kana made a small pouting noise in her sleep as her brother pulled himself from her grip, causing her to shift over to the boy with a little whine. "My Nikki," murmured the girl, her words causing a small smile to spread across the only conscious member of the family who sat on the bedside smiling at his family. "That's right Kana-chan, you're niacin," whispered Minato as he smiled at the scene before him before pushing himself slowly from the bed, moving silently out the room and down the stairs out into the front yard, blinking at the new light of the day, his eyes traveling up towards one of the trees that decorated the yard. "Kakashi, you don't have to watch me from there," called the blonde, a hint of amusement on his lips as he spoke. A moment later there was a flicker of moment as Kakashi shivered into being a few feet in front of Minato, his grey hair dotted with small spots of dew, his eye smiling at his old sensei. "I never could hide from you Minato-sensei," chuckled Kakashi as Minato shook his head smiling over at his student. "No, that was never your strong suit," replied Minato before he blinked a few times, looking up at the sky for a few moments before sighing. "Minato-sensei?" asked Kakashi as Minato paused, looking back to his student with a small shake of his head. "It's nothing Kakashi, just thinking. I assume Saratobi wants to see me at some point," finished Minato as Kakashi nodded slightly as he turned his visible eye up to the home before speaking. "Hi," he said, he's tried to keep things quiet, but after your arrival that really isn't possible. On top of that he's still trying to figure out just what happened, but so far we haven't found anything. The Hokage even had Inoichi Yamanaka go into his head to look for anything like what you described, but nothing was there," replied Kakashi as Minato turned to his student, eyes narrowing at the man's words. "Nothing? Not even some kind of chakra signature?" asked the blonde as Kakashi shook his head slowly. "Nothing, from what Inoichi could see his memories were as real as they had always been." "Sensei, I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing to?" started Kakashi as Minato gave his student a small nod. "Don't worry Kakashi, I'll let Inoichi look at me, but I want you there as well. If anything looks suspicious, anything, stop him. I don't want to believe that someone in Konoha was responsible for this, but I'm not putting my family at risk betting on this place twice," spoke Minato as Kakashi nodded to his sensei. "Understood sensei, I'll go and inform the Hokage," replied Kakashi before flickering back out of sight, leaving Minato to look out at the small yard for a few more moments before turning back into the home just as he heard a small patter of footsteps above him. Looking up, Minato found himself smiling fondly as Kushina moved by, her red hair flowing behind her, and down the simply white nightgown she wore, her expression soft as she looked down to the boy beside her that held her hand, rubbing his eyes blurrily. "It's okay Naruto-kun, the bathroom's this way," whispered Kushina as the blonde blinked up at her, nodding sleepily as he allowed himself to be led down the hall, his clawed feet padding silently over the wooden floors as he followed after his mother. After the mother and son pair had moved out of sight, Minato moved up the stairs and back into his room, smiling at what he found. Kana was now sitting up in bed, a red hair a mess as it hung around her head, the small girl blinking around at the room as she opened her mouth in a small yawn before smiling as she saw the blonde man appearing in the door. "Morning Towson," murmured the girl happily as Minato moved over to ruffle the girl's red locks, drawing a small smile to her face as she batted his hands away. "Morning Kana-chan, what do you say we get some breakfast started? I'm sure your Nikki would enjoy a meal made by Hisamoto," smiled Minato as Kana nodded happily, jumping from the bed to land beside her father as the two turned from the room, moving out to descend into the kitchen. A few minutes later Kushina as Naruto appeared in the door, Naruto still holding tight to the red-haired woman as he blinked around at the kitchen, his nose sniffing at the new smells that were now wafting through the home. "Morning Kushina-chan, Naruto-kun," called Minato, turning to show the small apron he was wearing, a pan held in one hand as beside him on a small stool. Kana also turned, smiling widely at the pair, her own apron already covered in a mix of flour and other mixes, as she waved happily at the pair, sending a few flecks of batter from her fingertips. "Asan, Nisan, we're making breakfast," called Kana happily as Naruto blinked at the two before looking up to Kushina, who nodded happily at him before looking around to her husband and daughter. "That sounds great Kana-chan, I'm sure we love it," called the redeed as Naruto nodded slightly as he turned his eyes up to Kana's excited face. "Hi, it smells really good," whispered the boy, his words causing Kana to positively glow with pride as she turned back around with a happy smile upon her lips. As Kushina moved over to take a seat, Naruto hopped up beside her, physically more relaxed as he watched the people moving around him, flashes of cola and the foxes bustling about touching his mind as he watched the family move around. They don't hate me, they feel so warm and happy. Kushi-kasen said she'd stay with me all night and she did, all of them did. Cola said that they would look after me, but they're just so nice. Is this what family is like? I like it," thought the boy, smiling softly as he looked around the group. As he watched them cooking, the boy suddenly stopped, looking around towards the home front door, his movement drawing Kushina's eyes, prompting her to move closer to Naruto. "Naruto-kun, what's wrong?" whispered Kushina softly as Naruto looked around to her, blinked a few times before looking back at the door, by now drawing both Minato's and Kana's attention as the feral boy continued to watch the door. "There's someone out there, they feel like they're trying to protect us," whispered Naruto as Kushina looked over to Minato, who nodded slightly, moving over to the table, setting down a small plate of eggs as he looked over to his blonde son. "It's okay Naruto-kun, he's a friend of ours, he just wants to make sure that no one come here without us knowing about it. If you want, after we eat I can introduce you to him," offered Minato as Naruto looked up at the man before looking around to Kushina, who nodded softly. Okay," replied Naruto quietly as the parent smiled softly at the boy before Kana came over, dropping a plate of biscuits upon the table, smiling happily at her work, but she'd somehow managed to decorate both her face and hair, as well as her apron by this point, drawing a small giggle from Kushina and Minato as Naruto looked over at her before letting out his own laugh at her appearance, causing the girl to pout cutely a moment before she too was laughing. A few hours later found Minato standing within the Hokage's office, looking across at his old friend who sat behind his desk, offering a small welcoming nod at the blonde's presence. A few feet from the desk Kakashi stood leaning against the office wall, his eyes seemingly buried in a small orange book, though if one were to look they would notice that his Sharingan eye was showing, scanning the room, continuously returning to Minato every now and then, checking for any danger to his sensei. "Minato, thank you for agreeing to come in, I know you're still worried about Naruto," started Sarutobi as Minato raised a hand, cutting the old man off from his speech. "Sarutobi, I'm here for my own reasons, there's no need to thank me, I want to know what happened to my son much as you. If this can help I'm willing to help," replied Minato, looking around the room, his eyes focusing on the other blonde man who was standing still, looking a little shocked at seeing the legendary fourth Hokage standing across from him. He stood at about Minato's own height, dressed in the standard green and black attire of a jonin, only accented by the red sleeveless coat and his long ponytail that hung down his back. As Minato turned to him he saw the man looking slightly blank. "Inoichi, shall we begin?" called Minato, snapping the man out of his small stupor as he nodded, moving forwards towards the fourth. "Hi Minato-sama," replied the man as he moved to stand behind Minato, his hand stretched out to lay lightly upon the man's head, as with a few deep breaths he allowed himself to slip into the man's mind. With a small pulse of chakra both Minato and Inoichi shivered into being within a large black void, blinking around at one another as they turned towards one another. "So this is my mind?" asked Minato, looking around at the blackness that stretched on for seemingly miles in every direction as Inoichi shook his head, holding out a hand as a few yards from the pair a smooth circular area shimmered into begin. A moment later Minato blinked, looking down to find himself standing upon the glowing surface as he turned to see Inoichi standing beside him. "Not quite Minato-sama, without the proper training your mind does not have a physical idea of itself, you can think of where we are as a temporary room I have made in your mind to view your memories," replied the ponytailed man. "I see, so, what happens now?" asked Minato, looking around as a few large scrolls appeared, handing around the circle of light they occupied. As the pair watched, the scrolls slowly unraveled, showing long smooth surfaces that reflected the light around them for a moment before beginning to shift till each showed a moving image upon it. As Minato looked around he saw images from just the morning, Kakashi speaking to him, Naruto and Kana sitting beside one another on the couch chatting with one another, Kushina hiding a few tears as she moved from the living room falling into his arms. "Minato, these are your memories, I need you to remember what happened the night of the Kyuubi attack, the night you said that this all happened," spoke Inoichi as Minato nodded, taking in a deep breath as the images shifted, changing to depict a spiral masked man, a great fox, the forest rushing by as the light of hundreds of fires danced below the raging Kyuubi, and finally finishing on his own home where he stood protectively over Kushina, who held the blonde and red-headed babes to her bosom, looking across the room to where 4 figures stood covered in the ash and debris of the recent battlefield. Flashback. So this Madara Uchiha caused this. Cursed Sarutobi, looking away from the room's window where he could still see the fires burning out in the village, wincing as the shadow clones expired, showing him an up-close vision of a building ablaze, a few shinobi pulling injured men and women from the wreckage. Hi, he's attacked us when the children were being born. He managed to rip the Kyuubi out of Kushina and set it loose. We were just lucky that she had enough chakra to seal it back into her and Kana-chan. Replied Minato, reaching down to run a hand over the small tuft of red hair of his daughter, causing her to squirm closer to her mother, letting out a small gurgle of sound as Kushina smiled softly down at her daughter. "Shhh, there Kana, it's alright," whispered Kushina, gently holding the cloth-covered baby closer to her, as in her other arm, the little Naruto snuggled up closer to his sister, both falling silent a moment later. "I still can't believe it, no one besides myself and the shinobi involved knew where you were. How did he find you?" muttered Sarutobi as beside him a blonde woman draped in a green and white haori over a simply blue shinobi suit stepped forwards. Tsunade shook her head, moving over to look down at the new children before looking over Kushina again with a small smile as her hand began to glow, moving steadily over the woman looking for any complications. The birth had been a strain of the woman alone, with the Kyuubi added on top of that. It was a literal miracle she had been able to stand, let alone help subdue the Kyuubi. "I don't like to say it, but we might have a traitor in Konoha. That would explain how they knew just when Kushina would be giving birth and where," muttered a white-haired man dressed like a mix of shinobi and kabuki actor, his red vest stained with ash and dirt from the recent battle. As he spoke, Jiraiya looked around the room as the others paused, turning to one another, taking in the grim possibility that someone in the village had sold them out. Or it could be he just found them. "Jiraiya, we just don't know," spoke Kakashi, moving forward, shaking his head as he looked around, his eyes settling on his sensei and his family. "Whatever the case, we need to make sure that sensei and his family are safe," spoke Kakashi as the group nodded, looking around at one another, slowly allowing their conversation to shift back and forth until the seal was suggested by Tsunade and the idea of faking their death was brought up as a way to throw the masked man off of their tracks. Only the 4 of them would know about the true fate of the Namikazes, and just as that horrible night gave way to the first rays of light, the Namikazes had disappeared from Konoha, not to return whole until years later. Flashback end. As the memory ended, Inoichi looked ahead, completely shocked at what he had seen, his eyes slowly traveling down to Minato, who stood letting out a deep breath as he looked towards the pony-tailed man. Soon enough the scrolls and light were swallowed by the blackness once more as both Minato and Inoichi found themselves blinking back into the office as the 2 blondes stepped apart under the watch of Sarutobi and Kakashi. "Well?" asked Sarutobi as Inoichi turned his eyes between the 2 for a few moments before moving to take a seat, shaking his head in confusion. "I don't know, Hokage-sama, it doesn't make any sense," murmured the man as all eyes turned to him, waiting as he seemed to pull himself together before looking up at the room, letting out a few breaths before speaking. Minato Namikaze died the night of the Kyuubi incident with his wife and daughter, leaving only Naruto to be raised alone. Began Inoichi, caused Minato to look horror before the man continued on, barely pausing. "And Minato Namikaze lived the night of the Kyuubi incident, going into hiding with his wife and 2 children, with the help of you, Hokage-sama, as well as your 2 students." Finished Inoichi, looking around the office as the other member looked at him in confusion. "What? Inoichi, what are you saying?" asked Kakashi, lowering his book as the head of the Yamanaka clan let out a breath, shaking his head. "Just as I said, Kakashi, according to your memories the first occurred, no tampering, not genjutsu, no chakra, it happened as far as you are concerned, and Sarutobi believes the same, but Minato-sama's memories show the second occurring and are also true as far as I am able to tell, no chakra, no bleeding from tampering, both of the memories are completely true." Finished the blonde man as he looked around at the group who were turning towards one another with open confusion upon their brows. "How is that possible? Could it be a seal, some kind of trick?" asked Kakashi as Inoichi shook his head. "Even the best seals show some proof. You can't alter a person's mind without scarring it somehow. You can bury the scar, but you can't erase it," replied the blonde as the group looked at one another for a few moments. "So we're back to where we began," whispered Minato as Inoichi shook his head slightly. "Not exactly, from what I saw I am forced to believe that Minato-sama's memories are what actually occurred," spoke Inoichi as the other looked at him, puzzled by his words. "I thought you said they were both real?" asked Sarutobi, tapping his pipe as Inoichi nodded. "Hi, both memories are real, Hokage-sama, and for your they happened, but only Minato-sama's accounts for his arrival and fits with what we know happened to Naruto. For the majority of the village he only became a center of attention a few years ago after the forest incident. Until then most of the village didn't even know he existed, which would fit if you were indeed following the plan that Minato-sama remembers, combined with his arrival, it seems obvious to me that his memories must be what really occurred. Finished Noichi as the pair of blondes turned towards Kakashi and Sarutobi, who were looking at one another slowly, before the old Hokage set down his pipe, letting out a tired breath. Which means that someone somehow did this to us, and that they also got to both Jiraiya and Tsunade at some point. Whispered Sarutobi as he looked around at the group before shaking his head in aggravation. Inoichi, I need you to prepare a full scan of my memories along with Kakashi's. This is a matter of the highest secrecy. Do not speak a word of these events outside of this room if you value your life. Spoke Sarutobi, his tone deadly serious as the ponytailed man rose, nodding toward Sarutobi. Hi, Hokage-sama, I understand. Replied the man before he turned to exit the room as Minato turned back toward Kakashi and Sarutobi, nodding to both of them. I'm guessing that the word is already beginning to spread. Asked Minato as Sarutobi nodded his head, slowly taking a puff from his pipe. Hi, your return is already spreading across the village as we speak to many people saw you for it to be hushed up and the clan heads are demanding some kind of answer. Replied Sarutobi as the blonde before him looked around before sighing, reaching up to rub his head in frustration. I see. He muttered as he looked down for a moment before seeming to come to some kind of conclusion. Alright, call a meeting of the clan heads, Kushina and I will announce ourselves to them, but the specifics stay between us. I don't want to tip off whoever did this that we think we are actively after them. Finished Minato, as Sarutobi nodded. I understand, I'll organize it for tonight, and Minato, I was going to send word to Jiraiya, but it could take time to find him if I use the usual channels. Could you send a summon to deliver it? Asked Sarutobi as the blonde man paused before shaking his head sadly. I'm sorry Sarutobi, but I've already tired doing that yesterday just after we returned. My connection to the toads is gone. Replied Minato stoically as Sarutobi froze. But a contract can only end if. Started Kakashi from the side as Minato turned to his student, finishing his sentence for him. If the summoner dies, I know. Whatever has happened is more serious than I think we can even guess. Replied Minato, looking between the two for a moment before with a nod he vanished into a flash of yellow light, leaving Kakashi and Sarutobi alone in the office looking at one another, wondering just what was going to happen next. A few seconds after the discussion within the Hokage's office had concluded, Minato found himself appearing in a small flash within the backyard of his home, his eyes immediately turning to see his redeeded daughter waving at him excitedly from a few feet away. Tausen, you have to see what Aniki can do. Called Kana, excitedly waving with one hand while pointing over towards where Kushina was standing, her hand reaching out, holding a small length of glowing reddish-orange chain. As Minato spied the thing in Kushina's hand, his eyes followed it back to where he saw Naruto standing looking down at his own hand in apparent interest as the end of the glowing chain stuck out of it. As Minato blinked at what he was seeing, he watched as Naruto gave the chain a few tugs, pulling out a few more links that inched out as pale ghosts of their fellows until the air around them seemed to hum, shaking until the chains began to glow with their colored light. Soon Minato found himself moving over, Kana rushing ahead of him excitedly as Kushina turned to see Minato welcoming him with a smile, the excitement on her own face mirroring that of her daughters. Minato, look, Naruto-kun has my chakra. Called Kushina, excitedly raising the chain up for her husband to see as he moved over to see Naruto looking between the two, obviously confused by their excitement. Why are you so happy? Asked Naruto in a small voice, confused by their excitement as he looked down at his hand, again shaking it a few times as the chain rattled. He had only been playing a little with Kana, the two running around, when Kana had tripped over stone, falling forwards towards a small pond near one corner of the yard. Without thinking, Naruto had thrown his hand forwards, an image of the chain Kushina had made a day earlier, flashing through his mind as he felt an odd heat building in his hand. Before he knew it, the orange chain had burst to life in his palm, moving as if guided by his thoughts to shoot across the yard, wrapping around the redeed and pulling her back just before she hit the water, landing her softly back on her butt. A moment later, Kushina and run up towards the pair, Naruto originally shrinking away, afraid of her being angry for what he had done. However, she had seemed excited, instead checking quickly on Kana before moving over to Naruto to see if he was alright, before letting out a small cry of joy as she picked up the chain, and now they were here. The blonde boy's question words caused both parents to turn their attention back down to him, Kushina dropping down to her knees, smiling widely as she reached out to pull Naruto into a hug. I'm happy cause my Naruto-kun took after me, Dadabane. Called Kushina happily as Naruto found himself smiling at the woman's verbal tick, thinking of his own as he looked between the blonde man and woman, smiling. But can't you all do it? Asked Naruto after a few moments as Kushina let go of him, smiling at her, the blonde boy shaking her head slightly. No, Naruto-kun, it's something only members of the Uzumaki clan can do, besides me I've never seen anyone else do it. Replied Kushina as Naruto blinked at her for a few moments before looking over at Kana, confused. But Kana said you could all use that chakra stuff. asked Naruto as Minato paused for a moment before glancing down at the chain. For a moment Minato simply looked down at the chain as Kana moved over to speak excitedly with Naruto as the chain slowly snaked its way back into the boy's palm. "Minato?" asked Kushina looking around at her husband who shook himself a little smiling back to Kushina. "Oh, it's nothing Kushina-chan, I just hope Naruto-kun doesn't start tying people up in his chains like you did." Chuckled the blonde as Kushina gave him a pouting look, her arms crossing across her chest. "Baka," she muttered before smiling around at her children, "Kana-chan, Naruto-kun, how about we go and have something to eat?" Offered the redeed as Kana nodded excitedly, Naruto looking between them before nodding as well, albeit in a more subdued manner than his sister, as he took her hand allowing himself to be led into the home ahead of the parents. While the two children moved ahead, Minato turned to see Kushina whipping away a few tears, his heart swelling slightly as he moved over to her, reaching around to hold his wife close as he ran a hand gently through her hair, drawing a small happy whimper from her. "He's really okay," whispered the woman as Minato nodded, holding his wife close. "Hi Kushina-chan, and he's still just like you, just wait, our Naruto-kun is still here," whispered Minato as the redeed nodded into his chest, shaking with small happy sobs. A few hours following the chakra incident, the family was once more in the backyard after it became apparent that the boy was more comfortable there, at least for the time being. Speaking of the boy, he was currently sitting on the grass-covered ground smiling as he watched a few kits running over Kana as she tried and failed to grab the little balls of fluff. As the blonde watched, his new sister was brought down again by a small wave of yipping kits, sending her giggling onto her back, waving her hand up in the air as beside him, Uri let out a tired chuff at the sight. "I have to say she's a hit with the little ones. Reminds me of you when you were just getting to know them," smirked the fox as it ideally scratches the back of its ear. Beside him, Naruto gave a small nod, pulling his feet closer to his chest as he cast a look back to the house, spotting the twin forms of Minato and Kushina where they sat watching their children, both noticing his gaze and offering small smiles before he turned his eyes back towards his sister, his face a mix of happiness and uneasiness that did not go unnoticed, to the fox sitting beside him who shook his head impatiently. "So are you just going to keep glancing at them, or are you going to try and actually meet your parents? Never figured you for a scaredy cat," chuckled the fox as Naruto shot him an annoyed look. "I'm not scared, I just don't know what to do. She seemed so sad when I didn't remember her," replied Naruto as the fox gave him an annoyed look, whapping him over the head with his tail, causing the blonde to turn towards him with an annoyed look on his face. "Baka, just talk to them, I was there last night, remember? Your body already knows you're safe with them, and you know it. So what if you don't remember them, is that going to stop you from trying to know them now? Get over there and start talk to them." "Here," paused the fox as it slammed its tail down onto the ground as a small puff of smoke appeared, shifting away a moment later to reveal a solid white kit blinking up happily, its tail wagging in excitement as it saw Naruto. "Take my little girl over to meet them if you need something to talk about," smiled Uri as the little white kit yipped, jumping happily onto Naruto's shoulders, nuzzling him as Uri watched him. After a few moments of looking back at the pair behind him and back to the two foxes, Naruto slowly rose, turning around to where Minato and Kushina sat watching him. Drawing in a deep breath, the blonde began to slowly make his way forwards, the little kid hopping down into his hands, her ears twitching as she looked between the blonde that held her and the pair he was slowly moving towards, wiggling with apparent excitement. Meanwhile, while Naruto had been talking with Uri over with Minato and Kushina, both had in turn been watching their children playing, smiling as they saw Kana waving to Naruto before getting swarmed by the kits a moment later. "So he doesn't remember anything?" whispered Minato as Kushina shook her head sadly. "No, he gets nervous whenever Kana or I ask about it, but I can tell he really doesn't remember anything except living in the forest," replied the redeed sadly as Minato reached over to take her hand, squeezing it gently as her eyes meet his. "We'll find a way to help him, Kushina, I promise. Whatever happened, we're here now and we'll protect him," spoke the blonde as Kushina nodded, looking over as she saw Naruto slowly turning to them, her attention drawing Minato's attention as well to their son's approach. Soon enough, Naruto found himself standing before Minato and Kushina, looking slowly between the two before dropping his slitted eyes to Fox in his arms. Kushina-san, Minato-san, this is your," whispered Naruto looking up from the kid up towards the two adults. As his eyes meet with theirs, he saw them offering gentle expressions as they looked down at the pair. "Hello, Yuri-chan," smiled Kushina, reaching out to gently scratch the kid behind the ears, causing it to yip happily, nuzzling against the woman's hand for a moment before jumping onto her lap, giving a small fox grin as she settled herself down on the redeed's lap. "Yuri-chan," called Naruto, worriedly stopping as he watched Kushina not throwing the kid off of her, but instead gently running a hand over the fox's white fur, drawing a purr of happiness from its tiny form. "It's alright, Naruto-chan, she's just fine," whispered Kushina as Naruto slowly relaxed, looking between the two before nodding. "Hi, sorry, most people don't like them," replied Naruto softly as he felt Minato's hand gently pushing through his hair. Naruto-kun, they're special to you, that means they're special to us. I know it's hard to believe, but you and Kana are more important to us than anything. Spoke Minato, an almost pleading note to his voice as he tried to impress upon his son just how much he meant to both Kushina and him. Slowly Naruto nodded, looking between the woman and Minato before nodding. Okay Kasen, so do you want to meet the others? Asked Naruto hopefully as Kushina nodded, slowly pulling the white kid into her arms as she rose. Hi Naruto-kun, I'd like that. Can Minato-kun come too? Asked Kushina, smiling over at Minato, drawing the boy's eyes around before nodding. Hi Tausen can too. Smiled Naruto, sounding more relaxed than he had since he had arrived at the home. Smiling, Naruto turned, moving ahead with his parents falling behind him as they headed over to where Kana was sitting, their eyes falling upon her smiling face as well as the pair of yellow and red fox kits perched on her head. Along with the two now acting as her headwear, another dozen or so kits also surrounded the Reed, grouped around her, all yipping happily as she smiled, looking over at her familiar's approach, giggling as the kits continued to pounce on her. Anani he and Nikahahakai he helped manage the Reed between giggles as the kits hopped around her, brushing up against her, drawing fresh giggles as Yura blinked around at the girl before letting out an excited yip, hopping down to bowl the girl over into the mess of fluffy kits as Naruto called out. Okay guys, hey, I want you to meet someone. Called Naruto as first one, then another of the kids' heads popped up, turning to him till all of them were blinking up at him, their ears twitching as he nodded. This is my Kasen and Tausen, and these are the little ones, that Kiki and Miko and Popo, and here Naruto started going through all of the fox kids' names, pointing them out in turn as Minato and Kushina tried and failed to remember each of the names as more and more piled on top of the rest till a heavy sigh drew their attention around. Naruto, you're losing them. Called Yuri, chuckling at the parents' expression as across from them, Naruto blinked before smiling awkwardly, raising a hand up to rub nervously at the back of his head, causing the fox to sigh, shaking its head before grinning mischievously over at the boy. I have an idea to make things easier, hey, first one to catch Naruto gets to stay the night. Called Yuri as the kid suddenly turned to Naruto, who went wide eyes before turning to the larger fox a second before he was rushing away from a sea of kits, revealing Kana lying on her back, looking dizzy from her little kid overload. Above the group, Minato and Kushina watched as Naruto was jazzed around the yard by the small stampede of kits, looking over at Yuri, who gave them a small shrug. As they watched Naruto manage to dodge the mess of kits before pelting across the yard with the furry little kits in hot pursuit. The chase came to a sudden end when a white blur came flying out of the pack, crashing into Naruto and bringing him down with a triumphant yip. That's my girl. Okay, the rest of you back to the forest, come on, and you behave or I'll tell your cousin about it. Oh, and Naruto, don't go getting my daughter into trouble or Cola will have both our heads for messing with her little girl. Finished the fox before he and the other foxes vanishing in a series of pops, leaving only Naruto face down with a little white Yura happily sitting on his back, looking very proud of herself. Yur-chan, can I have my Sachi back? Asked Kushina as the fox looked up to her, nodding as it hopped off of Naruto as his looked up at his parents who were smiling down at him. This is Yur. Smiled Naruto, grinning slightly as his parents chuckled, Minato bending down to help his son up. After a few tentative moments where Naruto looked at the hand, he slowly reached out, allowing himself to be pulled up, smiling softly up at his parents. Later that evening found Naruto along with Kana, flipping through a book, Kana telling Naruto what each page said as the blonde sat erupted with the story. Meanwhile, in the doorway into the living room, Minato and Kushina were watching, smiling softly at the scene playing out before them. As they watched, a little white kit swept its tail down, turning a page for the pair as Naruto reached up to give her a small scratch behind her ear in thank, drawing a happy yip in reply. So, whatever happened to Kakashi and Sarutobi happened to Naruto-kun. Breathed Kushina sadly as she watched Kana trying to help Naruto to understand the words on the page. Before Naruto's departure, the opposite would have been the norm for the pair, but now the boy held no knowledge of those happy days. As Kushina spoke, she looked over to where Minato stood, nodding his head sadly. Hi, at least it stands to reason that's what's happened. Replied Minato, looking around to Kushina, who turned her attention back to the children, her eyes distant as she watched them. After a moment, the Reed's lips parted in a small whisper. If only we hadn't sent him away. As she spoke, Kushina felt her husband's arms closing securely around her. As she turned watery eyes up, she saw Minato shaking his head firmly, looking down at his wife. No Kushina, don't do this to yourself. We couldn't have known, no one could have. It was the only thing we could do. Replied Minato as he pulled the Reed closer to him, his eyes turning back into the room, tracing for a moment over the seal painted upon the opposite wall, now looking somehow innocent in the small light from the setting sun. Soon enough, Naruto and Kana began to become visibly sleepy, the small form of Yura already slumped between the two, letting out small whining snores as it nestled between the pair. As the children began to drift slowly to sleep, both Kushina and Minato moved forwards, gently picking their children, a clone of Kushina, doing the same for the sleeping kid as they slowly made their way up the staircase. As Minato began to turn towards Kana's room, he felt the girl shifting, pulling closer to him, mumbling to herself as she did. "No, Nikki, that's a F like fox," mumbled the little reedy, drawing a smile to the blonde man's face as he looked around to where Kushina was holding her son, seeing her nodding at him as she turned back towards their room, her husband turning to follow after her. It didn't take long to prepare the two sleep-addled children for bed, the pair slipping into their soft nightshirts easily enough as they snuggle into one another in the center of their parents' bed, dropping off to sleep a moment later, arms draped lightly over the small form of Ur. As the parents looked down at this, both nodded as with a small puff of smoke a pair of clones appeared. Soon enough a red and blonde-haired pair moved out of their bedroom, moving steadily down the stairs and out through the front door to find Kakashi waiting, nodding at the two. "Don't worry, Minato-sensei, Kushina, I won't let anyone get anywhere near your family," spoke the silver-haired man as both Minato and Kushina smiled slightly at his words. "I'm sure you won't, Kakashi, don't worry, we won't be gone long," replied Minato as he and his wife turned, disappearing in a small flash of yellow light. A second later, both found themselves standing within the dimly lit Hokage's office, Sarutobi looking up at them, offering a small smile at their appearance. "Thank you for coming. I know you don't want to be away from Kana and Naruto for long, so I'll try and make sure this doesn't take long," spoke Sarutobi as both parents gave short nods at his words. Pushing himself up, Sarutobi soon found himself leading the pair of Namikazes through halls of the building, headed towards a group of people who may well contain those responsible for this series of horrible events. What if Naruto leaves Konoha to start a family? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.